28th at 12 o'clock. We welcome those from the public, and we also especially welcome our board members. We would like to excuse Chair Huntsman and Board Member Hanson. Let's do a quick roll call, and then I'll read a statement about doing virtual meetings. So let's start with roll call, and if you'll just say here. Okay, Randy Booth.
I'm here.
Thank you, Randy. Janet?
Here.
Thank you. Natalie?
Here.
Okay, I'm going to get a little more formal, sorry. Vice Chair Davis?
Here.
Board Member Earl?
Yes, I'm here.
We've excused Board Member Hanson. Board Member Hart?
Here.
Thank you. We've excused Chair Huntsman. Board Member Hymas?
Here.
Thank you. Board Member Lear? Board Member Moss? Board Member Norton?
Here.
Board Member Straight?
Here.
Just going back for two. Board Member Lear? Board Member Moss? Okay. Now we at least know who is here. So I'd like to read the following statement. As authorized by Utah Code 52-4, this meeting is being held electronically without an anchor location to reduce the risk of health and safety from COVID-19 by limiting the frequency of in-person meetings. So thank you, everyone. We're going to follow the agenda, and we're going to go to, actually, it's number 2 on our agenda, but so it's a review of legislation. We do not have any on 2.1 of legislator review of bills, but so we will move on to 2.2. It's an action item. It's legislative policy requests, and I'll turn the time over to Deputy Superintendent Angie Stallings.
Thank you, Vice Chair Belknap. Good morning, or actually now good afternoon, board members. Good to see you all virtually today. Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent of Policy. I will be discussing 2 items under this agenda today. The first, as Vice Chair Belknap mentioned, is going to be a request from staff to the legislature to amend the sections of code regarding our American, and Jeff, could you show the background memo, please? Because it also includes the proposed motion once we get there. So it's the agenda memo, just up a little bit. Under the report, yep. If you could display the agenda memo, I'd appreciate it. The American Civics Initiative, just as a reminder, this initiative requires our students to pass or to take a test where they have to answer correctly 35 out of 50 questions. And those questions are taken from the Federal Naturalization Civics exam. That exam was recently updated and now has, it used to have 100 questions, like a bank of 100 questions. Now it's got 128 or so questions. And the statute has an explicit number in there of 100. And so we are recommending that the legislature update that language. It's fairly technical. It would just essentially change the statutory code to meet the new 2020 version of the Naturalization Civics exam. Are there any questions for me about that one?
Any questions? Let me see if I can see hands. Okay. No, Angie, I do have one question, please, since nobody else has one. If it's gone from 100 questions to 150 questions, isn't there a percentage, maybe it's in rule, that they have to pass this test? And so if it's a percentage, will students need to pass with more questions to hit that percent?
And Vice Chair Belknap, that's a great question. Is Robert Austin available? I believe he was going to join us today to answer questions. If not.
Yes, I am, Angie, I'm here.
Oh, wonderful.
Board Member Belknap, I'm happy to address that. The statute, the continuation of the statute talks about passing 35 out of the 50 questions given to the students. So the percentage would remain the same. It would just, again, be 50 questions pulled from the bank. And we thought that if we didn't refer to the exact number, then no matter how the federal test may change in the future, the statute wouldn't have to be revisited.
Thank you so much. That's great clarity. Anyone else have any questions on this? Board Member Earl?
Thank you. Sorry, it took me a minute. I have a new reaction here, or anyways, it took me a minute to find my raised hand. I'm used to doing it the other way, so I apologize for the delay. Yes, I just have a couple of questions. So the only thing that's being changed is the striking out of 100 because there has been an addition, right? Am I understanding that correctly? Or are there additional changes that we're making recommendations to?
Go ahead, Angie.
Yeah, no, it's just the number. I don't think that
Okay.
there's any plans for any other amendments to the section of code.
Okay, great. That's great. I read through those questions, those additions last night, and I think the new questions. Maybe this is a question for Robert. Robert, so there's just a mix of questions. Are there several formats that are sent out to districts to administer? Several different formats? Because if I understand this isn't administered online. This is an in-person. Is that accurate?
It can be administered in lots of different ways. It could be online. It could also be administered in person, depending obviously on COVID or not. But the LEAs will have options really at their local control in determining which questions they want to ask from that bank of 128.
Okay, thanks. That provides clarification. So the district decides how they want to administer that. Is that accurate? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Davis?
I have a motion when you're ready, Chair.
Oh, go ahead. We don't have any other hands.
I move that the board supports staff working on legislation to amend the American Civics Education Initiative provisions in section 53E-4-205 due to the recent update to the federal USCIS naturalization civics exam.
Do we have a
I
second?
second that.
Who was
Board
that?
Member Booth.
Thank you, Board Member Booth. Do we have any questions concerning this recommendation which is that the board supports staff working on legislation to amend the American Civics Education Initiative provisions in section 53E-4-205 due to the recent update of the federal USCIS naturalization civics exam. Any questions or comments to that? I just need to make sure. Seeing none, let's see if we can vote with our hands today. Let's try that and see if it works. It looks like they're no, it's there. I'm sorry. It should be a check mark, but leave your hands there. If you have your hands up, I know that's a yes. So let's see what we have. Okay, we may have to do a roll call. This is who I have voting yes right now. And if you have put something and it's not here, I don't see something from Board Member Straight, Board Member Moss, Board Member Booth, Board Member Norton. Have you voted on this?
Several times.
Okay, then I'm just going to do a roll call vote. It'll make it cleaner and more accurate. So let's start with Board Member Hymas.
Sorry, yes.
I'm doing it in the order on this board. It can't go that way, but I'll just do that. Check. Board Member Booth.
Yes.
Board Member Cannon.
Yes.
Board Member Klein.
Yes.
Board Member Davis.
Sorry, yes.
Sorry, Vice Chair. Board Member Earl.
Yes.
Board Member Hart.
Yes.
Board Member Lear. Still not here. Board Member Moss.
Yes.
Board Member Norton.
Yes.
Board Member Straight.
Yes.
Lorraine, that's a unanimous vote with Lear, Hanson, and Huntsman not here. Thank you so much, everyone. Okay, I gotta look at my agenda. I just have to move papers around here. Something new for all of us, moving papers, isn't it? If you'll move your hands and your check marks, that would be great. Okay, we are on to 2.3, which is a discussion of our 2021 general session legislation. This will again be Deputy Superintendent Stallings.
And actually, Vice Chair Belknap, there is a second item under 2.2 that.
Oh, I'm sorry, I don't have it on here.
No, that's all right. We don't need a motion on it. I just wanted to give you an update on a policy request that was made. We asked as staff to pursue a policy request, which was a refile of HB 469 from the 2020 session. So yeah, Jeff, if you could just go there into the legislative policy requests item 2.2, and then the document is, it states education monitoring and funds management amendments. So it's the Representative Snow. So we've been working with Representative Snow on the bill again. It's we started with proposing a refile of last year's HB 469. And as before the bill has not been numbered yet, which is why it's not in the next 2.3, but Scott Jones, Debbie Davis, Chair Huntsman, and I have been meeting with stakeholders as well as Representative Snow on what this bill would look like for this year. The first two items should sound familiar because they're both things that the board supported in previous meetings. The first one would be to codify new state funds management and monitoring standards. You may remember that last year's bill simply codified that the board shall use the federal standards as unless something is explicit in code that contradicts. But in lieu of referencing the federal standards, what the stakeholders, Representative Snow and others, would prefer is if we create new state monitoring standards. And the idea would be that those state monitoring standards and funds management standards would be similar, if not identical, to what the federal monitoring standards are. And the reason is to provide that continuity of systems. If you have different standards for monitoring, and remember, this is the how you monitor and not the what. So it doesn't create additional strings. It doesn't give approved or unallowable or allowable expenditures for funds, but it's how the funds are handled and how you report on them. And some of you may know or be familiar that we've had some monitoring findings recently where LEAs have requested clarity or have challenged when or whether we apply federal monitoring standards. And so this would clarify, at least for purposes of our state programs, what those monitoring standards would be. And just as a reminder, when we are audited or monitored by the Office of the State Auditor or the federal government, they use the federal monitoring standards even for our state programs. And so this clarity is something that may sound new to our new board members, but has been something discussed since 2019. You'll remember we had discussions in the Law and Licensing Committee and actually started down the road of codifying this in board rule, and then we pulled back to work on it during the 2020 session. And now that bill just was numbered fairly late in the session. So now we are bringing it back again, working on that. That would be number one issue, would be to codify new state funds management and monitoring standards in code. And I don't know if you want me to pause, or should I just go through all three quickly and then take questions? What would you prefer?
I think that we should probably ask questions on each one. Otherwise,
Okay.
we might get a little convoluted. So, Board Member Earl?
Yeah, let me just ask a quick question. Are we,
Jenny, you went back on mute.
I'm sorry. I'm just trying to clarify this. So I think, do we anticipate there's less bureaucracy associated with this because we're not having to, if the federal, change theirs or make changes, then we don't have to change that? Is that why, so that we're kind of just focusing on what Utah needs, even though we'll probably align? Am I understanding that correctly, Angie?
Well, I would say the intent behind the codification is that when we monitor state programs, there have been times, we'll use special ed as an example. You've got federal funds in special ed and you've got state funds. And oftentimes when our staff monitor LEAs, they look at both at the same time. And we've had some LEAs, when we use the federal monitoring standards, as we're monitoring both, they have pushed back and said, no, you shouldn't use the federal monitoring standards for the state programs. But we don't have any explicit state monitoring standards. There's none in code or in board rule. So in general, that has been the practice, not just by our office, but the auditors, the state auditor and legislative auditor, that, you know, mostly the state auditor, when they audit us for how we're doing our monitoring, and same with the federal government, even when the state auditor is looking at state programs, they use the federal monitoring standards when they look at what we're doing. And it makes sense from I would say, maybe this is really your call, but one of the arguments for why you would want the monitoring standards for our state programs to be the same is because then you don't have different systems. It's really about how you handle funds, how you report them. It's not about the allowable uses. It's not going to create strings. For example, if state funds can be used for a certain purpose, using federal monitoring standards doesn't somehow limit or restrict it more than what the state code gives. And Director Debbie Davis or Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones, who know much more about this than I do, I'm sure could probably answer the more technical questions of what that means. But if you scroll down, and you don't need to necessarily scroll down, Jeff, but for board members, if you did scroll down in this document, we have provided examples of what those monitoring standards would be and where they would come from. So the idea would be to look at what's currently in the CFR, or the Code of Federal Regulations, and to codify standards similar or the same standards, and get clarity. If there are things that need to change because, you know, there are some areas that make sense to change, then we do that. But hopefully then it can show you what kinds of things we're talking about with respect to monitoring.
Okay, I guess what I'm looking for, and I think you've answered that, is the simplification, right? To simplify it so there's not confusion and we're able to better do what we need to do. And I guess that's the question I was looking for, is making sure that's happening. So thank you, I appreciate your time.
Yes, absolutely. That is the intent, because by streamlining them, you only have one standard instead of multiple. So thank you. All right.
Go ahead, Angie.
Okay, thank you. The second one's a fairly technical change. And again, you already voted on this, but I just wanted to remind you this would likely be put in this bill as well. And it would be to delete the reference to FASB in this one section of code 53E3501A, because now all LEAs, charters and districts are subject to GASB. There's another section of code that says all LEAs shall use GASB. And so this reference to FASB in this one section is just a little confusing. So our recommendation is just to strike it. Any questions on that one? It's fairly technical, so.
I don't see any hands, Angie, go ahead.
Great, I'll move on. So this is the one, this number 3 is the new, kind of a new idea that we've never presented to you. And this creation of a contingency fund was a proposal from charter school and authorizer stakeholders. And we reviewed it, USBE staff as well, and wanted to bring it to you to see if you have any feedback on it. You may remember the former version of the bill that was drafted last year, this HB 469, would have explicitly stated that authorizers have a fiduciary duty over their charter schools. And if there was debt or funds owing, not debt, but funds owed to the state or the federal government after a charter school closed and there were no assets to cover it, so something similar to what happened last year with AISU, or maybe it's been 2 years now, the time flies, that the old bill would have said that the authorizer would need to cover those funds. And then USBE, if not, then USBE and the authorizer would go together to the legislature to seek an appropriation. What the stakeholders have proposed and given this as an idea, and this is done in other states, is to create a contingency fund, sort of a risk pool or a risk fund of sorts that would start with 1 million one-time funds, and then over some years, the community or the charter schools would contribute $2 per student annually to the fund until it reached $5 million. And that fund would be used only upon closure of a charter school to pay funds owed to the state or the federal government after all of the assets of the school have been, after either the authorizer, the school, and USBE have tried to collect from the school's assets before they close. And it would be managed by USBE, and in partnership with an authorizer is when they would decide that the funds would be taken from the contingency fund to be paid to the federal government. So this, as you'll know, we've had some confusion or differences of opinion between the authorizer and USBE about who is liable or who's required to pay funds to the federal government when a charter school has unallowable costs and they're unable to pay it because they close. And so this number 3 is one option of how you could address that by having this contingency fund available if and when something like this ever happened again. And I'd be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Angie. We have Board Member Straight.
Yes, thank you. So, Angie, what was the rationale for the $5 million number?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. It was just, I can find out more about the rationale behind that. I think the idea is to have a sufficient enough cushion or funds available in case something ever happened with maybe a very large school, or there were findings that were large on the larger side, over $1 million. We have had, as you know, findings of LEAs, both charter schools and school districts, and there have been times when they have exceeded, they've been quite large. Now, the good news is most charter schools and most districts, they pay, the amounts are not that large, that schools are able to provide the funds to reimburse those unallowable costs, and it does not result in the closure. This would likely only come up if and when there were funds owing and the school closed, but we're not necessarily assuming that the school closed because of the findings. Sometimes it's just that it kind of all happens at the same time, but that's the idea, is to make it large enough that it's a good protection. It lowers the risk for the state, but not so large that we have money or funds that aren't being used for other educational purposes. So,
Can I do a follow-up question?
Go ahead, Board Member Straight.
Thank you. So my suggestion would be, because I have no actuarial data or evidence to say what that number would be, but perhaps if a number could be arrived at that was based on some type of data, and it may already be that case, I would suggest that we also do an index on whatever that number is, and actually index it year over year as part of that.
okay, we'll take a look at that. So and I apologize, I cannot hear you very well. Board Member Straight, you're very
It was
low.
hard.
But I think what I heard is you would like us to look at the data to really make sure that whatever number we're proposing makes sense. Is that based on data?
Yes, and then index after that each year. Index that number to where it naturally increases.
Oh, yes. Okay, great.
Thank you. Board Member Earl.
Yeah, I have about 3 questions. So if that's okay, Chair, can I ask those?
Well, let's see, because we do have others. Try 2 and then let's go from there, Jenny.
Okay, and mine has to do with the money too as well, which first of all, how long will it take to build up to that? There's going to be we're asking for $1 million to be put into the fund, and then, so I guess how much annually will be contributed currently for our charters?
So what I was told, and again, if Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones remembers differently, please feel free to chime in, that it's going to take about 27 years before it builds up to 5 million. So it would take a while before it got there.
Okay. Okay. And then the other question is, who helped with this dialogue? Meaning, it sounds like the charter board with others have carried on this dialogue. I'm just curious who the participants were.
Yeah. So that we had state charter school board leadership. We had Utah State, who's now an authorizer leadership, also participate. Royce Van Tassel, Kim Frank, Chris Blake. I think that's essentially charter school representatives, and then authorizer representatives were involved.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know. I just wanted to make sure we were, really addressing what they were needing and making sure that our needs were addressed too. Thank you.
Board Member Earl, why don't you ask your third question? They were short. You're on mute.
My question has to do, I don't know if this is going to be a longer question, but you had mentioned, I wrote down, what do you mean when they will decide who will pay? I guess what I'm saying, what I want to make sure is that we spell out really really clearly at what point someone would pay and someone wouldn't. Do you know what I mean? That there isn't that question, because that's what's been the question from the start, is at what point does that play in? And I know you kind of addressed it here. I just hope in the law that we're really, there is a clear process for that. So I don't know if you want to speak to that, or if that's just maybe a statement even.
Well, so far I would just say, so pretty much what you see on the screen right now is what the stakeholders presented to us. So this was their idea, not trying to say it's not good or whatever, but we haven't flushed it out because it wasn't really our idea, but I think those are good things for us to look into as this gets codified in code. And it may be that there are some things that the board will need to clarify also in board rule. So we could ask for some of that, just some of those decisions to be left to the board as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Angie. I was just going to say that this could, the function of this could be done in rule. It makes it a little more nimble for us. So Board Member Lear, hello, Carol.
I will unmute myself. Sorry, I had 1 p.m. in my head, and thanks to Cindy, who worries about me, and Jeff, who worries about all of us, I am here. I missed the very introduction of this. I just wanted to ask a more basic question about this particular proposal. This is just an idea from stakeholders, right? It's not anything the staff supports yet or has done any work on. It's just an idea from stakeholders. Is that accurate?
Yes. So I guess the way I would state this, because it's hard to say whether or not staff supports it. What I would say is there's different ways to handle this issue of when there are funds left owing to the federal government or state government after a charter school closes and there are no assets to cover it. The one that we had proposed, staff, was to explicitly state the authorizers have a fiduciary duty and that the authorizer would cover those funds. And then if they didn't have those funds, that the authorizer and USBE together would go to the legislature to seek the funding. But the stakeholders presented this, and I wouldn't say it's something we're against. It's just another policy option. Different states do different things to cover this liability. So it is in the idea stage. It was presented to us very recently, and Chair Huntsman and I talked about it, and we thought it would be good to get your feedback on it before we get too far down the road and say, yes, we think the board would support this, or because in some ways, a lot of this is kind of a package deal in some ways. So it's an attempt to clarify some of the recent issues we've had once we've had monitoring, findings, and then how to deal with those funds that are still owed. So.
Can I have a follow-up, please, Chair?
Yes, Carol.
Because you said that word, you're seeking feedback. I think this is a creative idea and approach. I have a couple of reservations. One, I'm wondering who would maintain the fund, if that would involve any work, and that would be an additional responsibility for the USB, if it would be an additional responsibility for the USBE. I think we need to evaluate the difficulty, if we want to add that to our responsibilities. And secondly, $1 million is pocket change sometimes in legislative discussions, but I think this is perhaps something that maybe should start at zero. I don't know why it has to start at $1 million, because it is something that would benefit only charter schools. And thirdly, I have concern that I'd like it discussed with not just charter school stakeholders, but public education stakeholders, because it is public education money. So I hope there's an opportunity for further discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Board Member Lear. Vice Chair Davis.
Yeah, I can't on my screen get the number of this right now, but I'd like to make a motion when you're ready, Chair.
That would be fine. Carol, did you have another question? Just want to make sure.
You're muted, Carol.
Oh, I don't have another question.
Okay,
I'm
thank you.
lowering my hand as I speak.
Okay, Vice Chair Davis, go ahead and make your motion, and then we'll let others speak to that motion. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to move that we support staff in moving forward with discussions on this legislation, and I'd like to speak to the motion.
Speaking a second.
Second?
Thank you, Member Straight. Now, Cindy, would you like to speak to it, please?
Yes, you know, as we know, this has been a little bit of a bumpy road in the past in this area, and I have always felt from the beginning that we really needed to find a long-term solution that could be a collaborative solution between our board and the state charter school board. I guess I could turn on my video and be friendly and say hello to everyone. As we've heard from Deputy Superintendent Stallings, since this is rather new and they need some time to study, I think we should go ahead and make a motion of support to continue in the conversations and work on the legislation.
Thank you, Board Member Davis. Board Member Cannon?
Yes, I'm struck with the idea that Angie presented, saying USB staff thought it might be a place to start by holding the authorizers accountable. And I would be in favor of pursuing that option. It seems to me that those who are authorizing charters need to have some kind of financial liability if something happens with their charter, as happened at AISU. And so I too question the idea of taking $1 million for public education, putting it into this fund. And I question too about every charter having to contribute $2 annually to support the funding. I'm wondering if maybe we shouldn't require more of the authorizers. That's my input. Thank you.
Vice Chair Belknap, can I just respond with some feedback or answers?
Yes, if that's what's been in the work group, that would be great.
Yeah, so.
Or discussion group, excuse me,
Yes,
not work group,
there's
discussion.
been some research done from the stakeholders and as well as our own AAGs, and it appears that it's not common, or in fact, I'm not sure if any other state, but I can't qualify that, but it appears that it's very uncommon that authorizers would be held liable or pay the debts of their charter schools. So usually authorizers will set up either requirements on the front end, like in some states, they require schools to have 60 days of unrestricted cash on hand. You know, there's different ways of kind of securing or stopping or limiting the risk and reducing the liability. But there are states who also have contingency funds like this. So the proposal that staff proposed at the beginning was not that, based on the research, it doesn't look like anyone else does that.
Thank you, Angie. Board Member Cannon, did you have another comment or question?
Yes, it sounds like though the authorizers were taking some kind of, or making some kind of financial requirement for these startups to have some financial stability before they've authorized them. Is that what I understand you to say?
Yeah, there's different approaches in different states. Sometimes even authorizers within the same state have different requirements. Some might have what I would call more rigorous or higher standards of financial or academic standards. And so I believe Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones mentioned that in Georgia, there's authorizers that require a significant amount of unrestricted funds to be kind of fenced off and held, you know, so that it can cover something like that. So that is another idea, to do that either at the state level. But again, this contingency fund is also something that's done in other states.
And Angie, just a further question. If the authorizers are requiring some kind of money up front, do the authorizers take charge of that money? Are they the ones that are overseeing that money, so that there isn't a responsibility elsewhere in the state for somebody else to monitor that money and see what's happening with it?
My guess is, and again, I don't think they take the money. I think what they do is they require the charter school to hold and fence off that money. And then if they see that the unrestricted cash on hand is dipping below that 60 days, that's when they would probably put this charter school on probation or something like that. But I doubt the authorizer requires the funding to be held at their level, but the contingency funds might be held in other states at the authorizer level. But the proposal we're making would have this contingency fund be controlled by USBE, because we have multiple authorizers, not just one.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Vice Chair Davis, and then Board Member Moss, you're next.
Oh, just to add in a little bit, I also reached out last night to the State Charter School Board Chair, Delana Tonks, and asked if they support this. And she said their board hasn't taken a full position on it yet, but what they've seen so far, she said they feel good about based on what's happening so far. So I'm guessing as these conversations continue, our staff and their staff will be able to all work together, and hopefully, you know, we can come up with something that works for everybody.
Thank you, Vice Chair Davis. It looks like we're trying to flush out some of the pieces today, but I'm not sure that's where we are. If we just want to have further discussion. If we're talking to the motion, we're talking about what we'd like to see moving forward with the board, with our staff working on this. So if we could speak to the motion, that would be helpful. Board Member Moss.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. I just wanted to speak in support of the motion and the concept. My understanding is it's not just the charter community, but also other stakeholders that have discussed it. And I'll just say, having transitioned from the State Charter School Board, I see this as another step in a collaborative way to solve some of these problems. Last year, there were significant teeth added to the State Charter Board's ability to step in and regulate and make sure that a school is not failing financially, that it's taking care of its obligations. There's the ability to replace directors, board members, to appoint even a receiver, to request paperwork and books through the charter school from a provider from outside. So a lot of things where I think the charter schools themselves recognized a need to, kind of clean up some of the potential danger that was out there. And so this is something I think will help move forward. And my understanding is the associations have gotten the agreement of charter schools to contribute towards that stability by donating or contributing to this fund. So I speak in support of it as something that I think is a good solution to a thorny problem that we've been wrestling with for a couple of years.
Thank you, Board Member Moss. Board Member Earl?
Yes, I just speak in support of this as well, at least the concept. I'm hoping we can maybe flesh out the details just a little bit more, but I would very much be in support of this.
Thank you, Board Member Earl. Just for clarity that we're speaking to having our staff continue to work on the concepts here and working on this, not necessarily a finalization of it. Board Member Lear?
One more thought to that, specific to that motion. I would like the staff, as they discuss it with other stakeholders, and I'm sorry, but when I heard stakeholders listed, I did not hear any traditional school stakeholders. They were all charter school stakeholders. But as we continue to discuss it, I would also like to look for an analogy to traditional schools. If a traditional school were failing, and I know they don't fail in the same way, but if it's struggling, what would that traditional school be able to do? What access, what funds could it access, so that there's parity between the groups of charter schools and traditional schools, and it wouldn't be something special for charter schools or extra, but it's something similar to something that traditional schools would have access to. So I wanted to add that concept to the discussion. Thank you.
Carol, did you have something else? Your hand? Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make one comment that if you look at this, one of the things that's already on the table of our staff moving forward is upon closure of a charter school. And so, Carol, I'm not sure that that fits, because when a school closes in a district, it's not the same as when a charter closes, because the entire LEA is closing, not just one school inside of a district. And they're not usually closing schools because of finances. They're usually closing schools because of enrollment.
And I thought, because we were in the concept discussion, I know that is exactly true, but I would also like to look for an analogous situation for traditional schools. And if a traditional school would have a fund, if there was something similar. That's
if there is, what I'm saying is I'm not sure we can find parity, but I appreciate the fact you want them to look for it.
Look for parity is what I'm asking.
All right. Okay, thank you.
No, I don't have.
The maker of the motion, do you have anything else?
No, thank you.
Thank you. All right, I don't see any other hands. So Jeff, can you help me with the exact wording of the motion, please? Or Angie?
And Board Member Belknap, I wasn't necessarily looking for a motion today, although I really appreciate Vice Chair Davis's motion so we can move forward with it, but it wasn't pre-prepared. So Jeff, I don't know if you're looking anywhere. I just wanted to let you know it wasn't a pre-prepared motion.
So Vice Chair Davis, will you repeat your motion and then I'll go from there?
I move that we support staff in continuing work on said legislation. Sorry, I can't remember the number of said legislation, but you could plug it in.
I'm not sure it has it there.
See it on my screen right now.
Scroll up to the top, Jeff, and there's a title. It's called Education. Sorry. Can you scroll the top? There you go. Education Monitoring and Funds Management Amendments.
Okay, on number 3. Okay, I don't see anyone. So let's do a roll call vote. Board Member Booth?
Yes.
Board Member Cannon?
Aye.
Board Member Klein?
Yes.
Board Member Vice Chair Davis?
Yes.
Board Member Earl?
Yes.
Board Member Hart?
Yes.
Board Member Hymas?
Yes.
Board Member Lear?
Yes.
Board Member Moss?
Yes.
Board Member Norton?
Yes.
Board Member Straight?
Yes.
Thank you. Lorraine, that is unanimous. Thank you. All right, Angie, go ahead. You keep going.
Great. So we are going to turn now to item 2.3, and that's the review of bills. And so while Jeff is pulling that up, we have today's list of bills that we'll start to review with you. And just before I start reviewing the list, I wanted to remind board members that you are welcome to let me or Jeff know if there's a certain bill that you want us to be prepared to speak to or review during these board meetings. And we're happy to do that. So I'll start with HB 93, Youth Suicide Prevention Program Amendments. The reason this bill, I'm bringing it to you today, is this wasn't a bill that staff proactively sought out or asked for, but Representative King had a constituent who's an administrator who was looking at the Youth Suicide Prevention Program language in the second. We have two youth suicide prevention programs. We have a secondary schools program for our middle schools and our high schools, and then we have an elementary program. And the constituent had some wording changes for the secondary portion. So Representative King shared the bill with us before the bill was numbered to, get our feedback, which we always appreciate. And as staff looked at the bill, we identified an opportunity to reduce some reporting and requirements for our districts primarily, but districts and charter schools if they have both secondary and elementary, by combining the elementary and the secondary programs into one program, so that then your districts who are likely receiving funds from both would now just have one program report and one program to monitor, and they wouldn't have the two separate programs. So we made the recommendation that the two programs be combined into the secondary program. Well, what happened when we did that is it triggered a fiscal note of $22,000. And this is why. The elementary program has a ceiling of $500 per school for this program, and the high schools and the junior highs have a floor of $500. So when you bring it into the secondary program, the funding for this program has maintained stable, but we've added new schools to the system. And as we've added new schools to the system, the amount per school that we could provide in the elementary program has lowered. So right now, with the existing appropriation, we could only distribute $478 per school without this $22,000 appropriation. So when the fiscal note was triggered, Representative King asked whether we should amend the bill to eliminate the fiscal note and eliminate that floor, that minimum of 500, or whether he should move forward to seek the fiscal note. And I told him that I would get feedback from the board before moving forward, because as you know, the 22,000 it's not something we anticipated. We don't have a business case on it. But it would make it so that our schools would receive $500 per school versus $478. So that's the background on HB 93.
Okay, I just also wanted to remind board members that we don't take action on these until the end. We have actually what I call a hard start at 3:30 to take actions on these bills. So if you have things you want to note right now, that would be important to note those now. Board Member Earl, do you have a question, please?
Yes, so but we can ask questions about the bill if is
Yes.
that accurate? Okay.
Yes.
So I'm trying to understand just a couple of wording items here. One of those is, so instead of the $1,000 for the upper grades, we're just doing 500 for everyone. Is that accurate?
That's
Okay.
what the result, that's why
And
the fiscal note
that-
triggers.
And the upper grades are good with that? And what I mean by that is, it would seem that that would be a key area where we would want the additional funding. So that's my question on that. Have you received any feedback from, or I guess I don't know if there's been any feedback from stakeholders on that, the cost of that?
Well, I
Or the
believe, sorry.
Reduction of funds, I guess, is what it is.
So the reduction, if the fiscal note or if the 22,000 comes, there would be no reduction to the secondary program. And that's why you have the fiscal note. So I guess what you're saying, Board Member Earl, is if the board were to somehow remove that minimum, that then I think the case, you make the case that maybe our secondary schools would complain, because now some of the funds would be going to the elementary programs. So we haven't heard any feedback yet on that, but that's probably because the bill as is would not reduce the secondary funds, if that makes sense. It's not taking funding away from them.
Board Member Earl, I think that Deputy Superintendent Stallings kind of missed your first question, and you can correct me, Angie, which would be fine, but it's not going to reduce that. The floor is still 500 for secondary. It just brings the elementary's top up to 500 equalized for the elementary. It didn't reduce the secondary.
Okay, because it's crossed out. That's why I'm asking that. But you're saying that there could be additional funds that would allow for that. And that's what the $22,000 is? It's
So
just not
yes,
stipulated in the law?
So,
Yeah.
and I don't know if Brian Olmsted is available and on, because he might be able to speak to this, but my understanding is this would not, we would keep the secondaries whole at the 1,000, but then the elementaries would reduce to 478 if we don't get the 22,000. I don't think that staff was planning on reducing the secondary amounts, so they should still be at 1,000, if that makes sense. But what they would have prorated down, and what has been prorated down for a number of years now, because again, the elementary program doesn't have that floor. But I can follow up if Brian Olmsted's not available to make sure that we're not harming or hurting the secondary program funds.
Okay, that's what I was concerned about. And then I have two other questions, if that's okay, Chair Belknap.
Yes.
Okay, so my other question is this bill on line, oh goodness. I apologize, I skimmed down to look at the numbers. It creates a list of kids at risk, but it seems to only focus on one risk factor instead of many. And let me find maybe I can find it on yours quicker than I can find it on mine. I just think is it common for us to do that? Do you know what I mean? We normally don't do that in our policies where we start listing out things because we're going to leave something out. So it's on line 53 where it says decreasing the risk of suicide among youth who are not accepted by family for any reason, including lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or questioning youth, which there is a risk there. But is that, I guess what I'm asking is those are not our only risks, and maybe they're not even our highest risks in our school. Are we, I guess the concern is in listing these, we should be listing those others of highest risk. And I think we could talk with our suicide specialist and find those others if that's what we're going to, and I say we as in the bill, support that it should be incorporative of others. And then just a general maybe statement or question at the end here. I really wish we would move out of, for our elementary grades, this idea of suicide prevention and get into preventative factors, because the preventative factors are the things that reduce suicide. They reduce alcohol, they reduce antisocial, all those things, instead of calling it a suicide prevention, to frame it from a positive, have a positive take on it. That's just my general statement, because those things that we're already doing in our health standards actually are preventative risk factors. So anyways, those are my two comments.
Thank you. Angie, do you want to answer the question about the list?
Sure. And I do not remember when this section of code was codified. So I don't have any insider knowledge on why they listed the ones they did. I guess I should say that. But we do sometimes in our board rules, we will list examples, and it does say including, so that means it's not limited to that. It can be more than that. But so I can't really speak to why that was chosen or those specific.
Thank you, Angie.
Okay.
I appreciate you that we don't know why and who put that in there. So thank you. All right. Let me see. Board Member Klein, thank you.
Okay, so I just had kind of a similar question. So are they doing suicide prevention in the elementaries right now? even though that wasn't in the original bill? Because it looks like the original bill, says that it's just for secondary grades 7 through 12. And then that's being crossed out on this. So could you just clarify?
Yes, the bill is also repealing the elementary program. So Jeff, if you scroll up a little bit, it should have a repealer. And that repeal, that 53F5206, is the current elementary suicide prevention program. So this bill just combines the two into one.
Thank you. Are you okay, Board Member Klein? All right. I see Board Member Earl's hand still up. Okay. Do any other board members have questions on this? Thank you. Okay, Angie, let's move on to the next one.
Great. So the next bill that we're going to talk about is first Substitute SB1. That is our base budget bill, the public education base budget amendments. That bill, I believe, has already passed, but it has received some attention since yesterday. And so just wanted to address or bring to your attention that there was some intent language that was added, and you can go down, Jeff, to about line 521 in the bill. And the intent language, which wasn't there in the original bill when it was first numbered, is there's this new language that gives some direction to LEAs on how they should use their ESSER funds. So we had always been planning on whatever restrictions were with the ESSER program to be the restrictions or the guidelines for the LEAs, but the legislature wanted to provide some additional guardrails or requirements, and so that's what you see there. Some we've already had, and I'm going to give some general information. I'm not the person who manages the applications or anything, so I could get some of these numbers wrong. But what I understand is about 87 of our LEAs have already submitted their applications for use of their ESSER II funds, and that some of the applications included requests for funding items that were different, that were in addition to what's listed here. And so Superintendent Dixon has been speaking with legislative leaders about how we have more than half of our LEAs who've already filed their plans and their applications for the federal funds, and before this language was included, and asked for especially 3 areas. There were 3 large areas that aren't included here that do come up in our LEA's plans. And those 3 areas were professional learning, mental health supports, and digital teaching and learning support. So like devices, hotspots, etc. And so she's spoken with legislative leaders, and she's been told or received a commitment that when the final bill comes out at the end of the session, that those 3 things, professional learning, mental health, and digital teaching and learning, will also be included and allowed. So just wanted to bring that to your attention. And we could probably move on. This bill has actually passed already, both houses. And so the amendments won't come to this bill, but would come in the final budget bill that you see later in the session.
So Angie, I have a question. I know some board members may, but my question is, this is already passed with the amendment, with the Senator Fillmore's amendments. Is there any opportunity to somehow include facility upgrades or renovations?
That could be a discussion. I will say, I think that is one thing that there's some objection to. So that maybe by the end of the session, yeah, absolutely. I mean, discussions will be moving forward, but for now, at least the three things that have the largest impact on our current LEA's plans were the professional learning, mental health, and digital teaching and learning.
Thank you. Okay, Board Member Hymas.
Yeah, you mentioned this list here, then you mentioned that you're going to add the 3 that were brought up. And I just wondered, I mean, our LEAs are fantastic about coming up with new and various ways of helping our students. And so I just want to make sure, and maybe I can't make sure, but is there freedoms there for LEAs to innovate? Or are we saying, no, this is the list and you have to stick to it? And if you want something added on the list, then you have to go through a whole process.
So to answer your question, we never advocated for any of this language. So this was something that the legislature did on their own. Because we've already asked for applications and plans, we were assuming that any restriction would only be the restrictions that the federal government, the federal fund, the program had. So that's a great question, but I think to answer your question, yes, you would be limited. This is an intent by the legislature to set additional guardrails above and beyond what the federal program allows or doesn't allow. So, and that's why Superintendent Dixon's been just in discussions with legislative leadership to send essentially that message, Board Member Hymas, that the LEAs generally already have plans for this, that they know what they want, and sending a message of let's let the LEAs determine that. So I think that is the message that Superintendent Dixon is sending, is exactly what you're asking for.
Okay, yeah, because guardrails are one thing. This list is very specific, right? So anyway, thank you.
I appreciate your comments, Board Member Hymas. Vice Chair Davis.
Deputy Superintendent Stallings, can you tell us, do we have LEAs that are already or have already spent some money in some of these areas? Because am I understanding it correctly? Is it a reimbursement from these funds? So if our LEAs have spent monies under the guide rails of the federal government, and then the state government tries to reduce the guardrails, are we going to have folks caught in that space where they have done things that were allowable under the federal government, but then are not allowable under this? And then are they on the hook for all of that money that they were expecting under the previous expectations?
To answer your question, yes, they would. As you read in the language, it states that if an LEA spends funds and it's not in conjunction with these requirements, that we, the state board, are to take some of their state funds, and minimum school program dollars, in exchange. But so I think that's what we'll be watching for, is seeing. I think that's exactly what Superintendent Dixon did, is we looked at those grant applications or the plans to see what is included in the plans, but not on this list. And the 3 biggest areas, or the 3 biggest expectations of how funds were going to be spent that weren't on the list, were professional learning, mental health supports, and digital teaching and learning supports, devices, etc. So, and I believe Superintendent Dixon also joined us. So, and she may need a minute to catch up and know what we're talking about, but she may be able to answer some of this as well, or Sarah Young or Deputy Superintendent Jones as well, because they did the research on the applications and what's included in the plans.
So, Angie, I'm going to keep going with the questions, but maybe at some point we'll have Sarah pull up the informational chart. Board Member Lear.
Thanks. I just wanted to briefly say I support the greatest autonomy for LEAs. I completely agree with Board Member Hymas and apparently what Superintendent Dixon is working on. And I would like to let LEAs decide what they need for their particular school or district, and limit the clawing back function that might fall to the State Board of Education.
Thank you, Board Member Lear. I like your terminology, clawing back, because I agree with that. Board Member Hart.
I did not know that a state could further restrict funds that were offered by the federal government. I'm wondering if we have any information on other states that have done this. Is this common? Do we have any information on that? And in addition, does the federal government know that we're further limiting the funds they're providing?
Angie, do you have any answers on that, or Dr. Dixon?
It looks like
Deputy Jones has his hand up.
Oh, Deputy Jones.
Madam Chair, for Board Member Hart's question, I'm not aware of any other states that are following a similar process. At the end of this, though, the legislature knows that they can't restrict the federal funds. So they're basically saying if you go down to lines 538 and they're on, they're basically saying, they're not saying they can't spend the money on what the federal government has said ESSER 2 funds can be used for. They're saying that if they do, then we do a reverse match, right? Which basically is we take $1 for every dollar that they spend. So they're, it's not, that's the way it was interpreted to me by a legislative attorney. Because we asked that, it's a great question. I had that same concern when the bill came out late yesterday. So, and that was the answer I got, is they're not, it's just if they do spend it, that we have to do, basically take dollar for dollar if it's something outside of this program.
Okay,
because
so
it is, just if I may real quick, because it is reimbursable, we'll have to ensure that, or it's a reimbursement process, we'll have to ensure that whatever documentation they give us fits into basically A through K.
okay, then I still have my second question. Is the federal government aware that Utah legislature has decided to make this maneuver?
Not that I'm aware of, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Hart. Scott, your hand is still up. Thank you. All right, any other questions or comments on this? Board Member Straight?
I know in regards to state code at the city level, we can make things more restrictive, but we cannot make them less restrictive. This might apply to this as well. I just think it's a difficult thing to throw this out there when these monies are need to be accessed now. So anyway.
Thank you. Sarah, I'd actually like to give you a minute to talk about what we requested from our LEAs and when we required them to have that turned in. And then if you wouldn't mind showing us what they have chosen already to this point to use the funding from the ESSER 2. Is that okay, Sarah?
Of course, Vice Chair Belknap, thank you. So
Thank you.
Young, Director of Strategic Initiatives. Jeff, if it would be possible to share my screen. I think I'm still disabled. I'll go ahead and start with kind of the process in regards to where we are, and then hopefully we'll be able to share some of those graphs. If not, we can share them via email. So as far as the ESSER 2 fund goes, we began the process once we received the award letter in early January of working with our financial operations team to be able to do allocations and following the federal distribution guidelines. Those allocations were shared with the field right after the Martin Luther King holiday. And we asked all of our LEAs to have their plans submitted to the Utah State Board of Education originally by Tuesday, January 26th by 5 p.m. of earlier this week. We received 151 plan submissions, and we're in the process through our leadership with federal title programs, having those plans reviewed, giving feedback and recommendations to those that were not ready for approval, and then moving forward with those that we were expecting to be able to approve prior to the release of the intent language. So at this moment, we have paused all of those applications in process and are just waiting for outcomes in regards to this particular legislation. I can share, thank you, Jeff, a visual. So this was created by Sarah Harward, our CARES Administrative Secretary. And you'll note that this gives a breakdown of the plans that have been received, what different categories in the federal allowances were represented within those submitted plans. So I'll note that if you add up all of the numbers together, you'll realize that's more than the LEAs and the plans that we have. And that is correct, because LEAs have the opportunity to be able to use their funds in multiple ways, provided they were in alignment with the existing categories as defined by the the US Department of Education. So you can see we also have it in a table in regards to the numbers of plans that represented each of the allowable categories. And I'm happy to share this information via email with the State Board of Education if that would be useful.
Sarah, will you just tell me, and yes, please, will you share it with us? Would you
And
just
if I
tell
can
us?
butt in, I just sent it to the board, Madam Vice Chair, so they have it now.
Oh, thank you. Would you tell us some of the top 2 areas and the 2 bottom areas that districts and all our LEAs are using?
Sure, you bet. So as far as our top areas, I think it's important to note that we see those kind of highlighted in, I would say, 3 areas. So the first is going to be the procurement of educational technologies, and that does include hardware, software, and connectivity in regards to addressing students across their LEA in regards to remote and digital learning needs. In addition to that, we also saw a large response related to a new category that was called out in this realm for ESSER 2, which was addressing learning loss for students. And they gave kind of a breakdown in regards to how those learning losses might be addressed, recognizing that there's a variety of strategies that LEAs may be using to be able to meet the needs of their students. In terms of lowest, I would say that there's 2. The first one is category 2, which is coordination of preparedness and response efforts for local education agencies with state, local, and tribal or territorial public health departments. I think that honestly, this was a category in 1 that also had a very low level of alignment. We see a lot of these relationships existing already within the community, just recognizing our LEAs work closely with the state as well as their local partners. So putting funds towards those efforts just isn't a regular use case. The other item is going to be, well, there's probably 2. I'll just focus on this one though. Training and professional development for staff of the local education agency on sanitization and minimization of infectious diseases. Again, most of our schools have been open for, since the fall. And so a lot of that training has already taken place as opposed to needing to put additional funds to those efforts moving forward.
Thank you, Sarah. I so appreciate this chart. This will be so helpful for us as we speak to legislators or moving forward. I like it when you're big on the screen like that. You probably don't. Okay, Board Member Hart.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure I understand. You mentioned the digital device as one of the top 2, but yet that's one of the categories that currently, without the amendment, is not allowable under Senate Bill 1, correct?
So thank you. That is correct. Under the existing language, it would not be an allowable use case unless the LEA was prepared to have their minimum school programs reduced by that amount.
But we're working on that, is what I heard. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, Angie, do you want Sarah, thank you so much for helping there. Angie, do you want to continue on to the next bill, please?
Yes. So HB 181, Personalized Competency-Based Learning by Representative Johnson. is a bill that staff requested. It is one of our policy requests for this year. What the bill does is it changes the phraseology from competency-based education to personalized competency-based learning. So it's really a renaming of our existing, as you know, we have a competency-based education grant program. We currently have about 12 LEAs, school districts and charter schools, who participate in that program. And the reason for the change in the name from competency-based education to personalized competency-based learning was to match the board's strategic plan and supports for one of our goals, which is to support personalized learning for our students. And so that's the bill. It's not, doesn't make a lot of changes. It's mostly name changes or brand change. And that's it.
Thank you, Angie. You can keep going.
So the next one Jeff is going to cover, which is HB 18, Driver Education Amendments, sponsored by Representative Ballard.
Hello, everyone. Can you see and hear me? I tried really hard to put a lamp right in front of the laptop so I don't look like I'm in witness protection this time. So hopefully that works. We've got the wrong bill pulled up. So we've got HB 18, the Driver's Ed Amendments. This bill was not a bill that was requested by staff. Just wanted to let everyone know this was a bill that was sought by Representative Ballard. And she did bring this to your attention because she did begin to engage us and our driver's ed staff. So we just wanted to quickly highlight, you can see here in the highlighted provisions of the bill very quickly, it extends the term of a learner's permit from 1 year to 18 months. Kind of one of the bigger things this bill does. It changes the identification information on the driver's license application to read sex instead of gender. That question came up in committee and that change was made to make it consistent with all other ID forms that are out there for passports and other different government IDs. And then it removes school district and replaces it with LEA so that the School for the Deaf and Blind can be included in driver's ed, which has not been in the past. And to clarify for anyone, if charter schools were not included, they are included. And that was already inherent in the definition of school district, but you can just scroll through and you'll notice on my screen as I'm sharing, I should probably highlight, you'll see these like here on line 136, you'll see different colors. I have a little extension on my Chrome that allows you to see the changes in the bill really quick. So orange is language we're getting rid of and yellow is language we're adding. I'll send you all an email and you can add this to your own web browser so it makes surfing a bill much easier. That's pretty much the extent of House Bill 18. If there are any questions, I'll start back to you, Vice Chair.
Yes, Board Member Hymas.
Sorry, just real quickly, are you saying that 14-year-olds are going to be behind the wheel? Is that what I'm hearing? With the 18-month permit, or is it still? Okay, it's still.
They have to be at least 15 years old here.
Still keep 15.
I've got a 14-year-old. You made me nervous. Thank you.
Well, actually, we're going to give it to 12-year-olds now. Good question. Thank you. All right. Thank you. Jeff, are you on to the next one? Board Member Hymas, your hand.
I am. I believe the next one, Angie, correct me if I'm wrong, is House Bill 222. And this one is a staff requested bill and Representative Jefferson Moss, Board Member Moss's brother actually, is running this bill for us. And this bill is really in response to some website programming changes that are being experienced with the School Trust Plan program. And so you'll notice we take out some chunks that might seem concerning at first when you read it. So I just wanted to highlight this for you and help you understand why you should not be concerned. You'll see this big orange chunk right here. So that's being deleted. And it's the requirement that on the school website, the school community council's information and schedule should be posted on or before October 20th. This is not going away. We still do want that information out there, but we are going to move this requirement into board rule, partly because the October 20th deadline being stated in statute, running a bill once a year is your only chance really to try and change a deadline. It'd be much easier if we could put flexibility in with that deadline through board rule process. We can change it once a month if we would need to kind of be more flexible. So you will be seeing, if it passes, a board rule coming before you in the future that will put this requirement into your hands. And it really just makes more coordinating changes in relation to updates to their website and their website programming so that everything is more up to date with what the school trust land is doing. And it's being supported by all of the trust land advisory groups and parallel offices that are related to this organization as well. But pass it back to you, Vice Chair.
Thank you. Board Member Earl?
Yes, I'm not sure anybody really might have this question yet, or an answer to it, but I was curious about some of the impacts of our SITLA lands with some of the executive motions that are going on with the shutting down of some of the oil type things and different things that take place on public lands. I don't know if is anybody hearing anything, I guess is what I'm asking staff or whatever, if that impacts those school lands at all.
And I don't see Paula, I'm going through the participant list. Paula Plant would be the one to be able to answer that. We can her respond forward.
I can send her a text and see what she's hearing about that. So thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Earl. You also have every opportunity to send it to the chair of SITLA and SITFO as well. You can do that as well. Okay.
Laura, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. We will continue to do, thank you so much, Matt. We will continue to do legislation until a little before 2 o'clock. Is that a good, Angie? Okay.
I'll jump to the next one, House Bill 42. You will recall this bill. This is actually a staff requested bill, and it was in response to the legislative audit that recently came out, well, I guess recent, as in probably about a year ago now at this point, regarding reducing reporting requirements for LEAs. So this was our first attempt at reducing some of the smaller reporting requirements that we know we can get away with and cleaning up code. And there's also some new requirements that are placed in this bill that you should be aware of. You might hear or notice some new processes that we are doing as staff around our administrative rules related to this bill. But really, it just kind of goes through and gets rid of a few reporting requirements. There's a whole chunk of reporting requirements that the Education Interim Committee is now foregoing. So they won't require us as the board to go to them and report, which in turn makes it easier for us in relation to the data that we're collecting from LEAs. There's a few programs that we delete altogether that we repeal because they are programs that were unfunded and have not done anything for a long time but do require a lot of reporting requirements. I'll scroll to the bottom here just to show you one of those is actually a repealer. Actually, a repealer is at the top. Is one related to 504 accommodations. We received some comments saying, are you getting rid of a 504 accommodation program? The answer is no. It was a program that was created with the hope that one day we would get a legislative appropriation, but the requirement was let's get a bunch of data up front from LEAs, and then it will help us in future sessions determine how much money the board would need for this program. Well, we've been collecting the data, and it's pretty difficult to collect the data, and the legislature never funded it for several years. So we have now just removed that program. There was no intent on the legislature side to actually pursue the full scope of that program. We also delete a report in the dual language immersion program that is no longer necessary. And I did want to highlight for you this yellow section in terms of reporting impacts analysis. This is where you might see some things a little bit different from the state board with board rules. We are going to do basically a cursory look when we write a rule and ask ourselves, is there going to be a reporting requirement triggered by this rule and how big is it? And that is something that we'll now be tracking as a staff. So that's something you can look for as well. Once this bill passes, it'll be an additional piece of information that you all may consider when you're looking at board rules and the changes that are being made. Well, that's House Bill 42. I can pass it back to you, Vice Chair.
Thank you. I do have one question, Jeff, if you'll go back up to the top. and maybe I missed this one, and maybe that was the piece of the yellow, that we are enacting one. Is that the 503-1-205?
Yep, that's
Yep,
the yellow
okay.
part.
I just wanted to make sure that those were synonyms. Okay, thank you so much. All right, go ahead.
Great, I'll pass it back to Angie. She's got the next couple.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So the next bill that we'll be reviewing is HB 105, Students with Disabilities Amendments by Representative Judkins. This bill you may remember from last session. It was also run last year. What it does is it increases the current cap on the growth factor for purposes of the special education add-on that we have. And so if you look at about lines 62, right there, Jeff's got it displaying, you can see that currently there's a growth cap of 12.18%, and that would increase for districts in a county of the first, second, or third class to 14%, and the school districts in the rest of the counties to 20%. And what that means is it will generate more funding through the special education add-on. So I just looked at the fiscal note, and it looked like it was just a little over $2 million that will be generated, but that will provide more funding for special education through our state program. I'm happy to answer questions, Vice Chair Belknap, if anyone has any.
Go ahead, Angie.
All right, the next bill is SB 118. I'm flipping back and forth. State School Board Candidate Amendments by Senator Reeby. It reduces the number of signatures that you are required to obtain if you want to get on the ballot from 2,000 to 500. So that should make it easier. And this is for State Board of Education candidates only. So thought you might be interested in this one since it is directly related to you. So I'd be happy to answer questions.
Board Member Earl?
Yeah, so my question is this, or maybe even a concern or whatever. So the board races, state school board races, are twice the size of a Senate district, or at least pretty close to that. But we're going to reduce the numbers. What is the number for a Senate district? I guess I need to maybe look closer to that. I guess that's my, we're going to reduce it down so it's. Yeah,
it looks
sorry.
like currently 2,000.
I'm having trouble finding the changes. So.
Board Member Earl, if it's helpful, the only changes are right on the screen right now. You can see 2,000 was deleted and 500 is inserted. So it looks like for a congressional district, it's 7,000 signatures. For state Senate, it's 2,000. For state House, it's 1,000. And then state board now would be going from 2,000 to 500.
Okay, thank you.
And there is still an or there as well, or 3% of the registered voters of who are residents of the district. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Angie. Board Member Lear?
Thanks. I very much support this. I think despite the fact that there might be discrepancies, Jenny, between the sizes of state board districts and other kinds of districts, the fact that we want to encourage every single person who has concerns about public education should overcome, I think, that concern. And I think we should support any effort to make it easier for people to run for the State Board of Education so we can have a more robust discussion and greater participation at all levels. And I think 500 is realistic. I guess the other factor is, as some of you have experienced, donors don't really contribute to State Board of Education races unless you have you're personally comfortable, or unless you have a specific issue that you're a proponent for. You don't get many donations. And I think this would again encourage all people, all kinds of people, all levels of income of people to participate in State Board of Education elections, and then we could have better discussions. Thanks.
Thank you, Board Member Lear. Board Member Earl?
I guess that could be argued for every race then, right? That maybe those numbers need to be dropped so everyone could contribute from all walks of life. I just wonder if there, if there is a need for that high of a number to make sure that there's enough of the public that's supportive. I think that's why that's there, not necessarily to eliminate people or to discourage it. So.
Thank you, Board Member Earl. Okay, Angie?
All right, I'll be moving on now to HB 258, Firearms Safety in Schools by Representative Shipp. This bill creates a 3-year pilot program for students to receive a 1 semester or 0.5 credit in PE in the safe handling of firearms. And it would be for students in grades 9, 10, 11, or 12. So it requires the board, so the LEAs, again, it's a pilot program, and I believe it requires at least three LEAs to be chosen. The board will, an LEA would apply to the board to participate in the program, yes, and the board will select up to 3 LEAs to participate. And it also requires the board to do some rulemaking to establish qualifications for instructors, establish the application process, a formula to determine how much to distribute, and also to potentially update our general education requirements rule or provide some sort of an ability for students to earn 0.5 of credit, half a credit for participation in the firearms safety course. I turn it back to you, Vice Chair Belknap.
Thank you. I do have a question on this one, 2 things. It says that we'll come up with who teaches it, but I would think that they have to be, I don't know where they get training for this other than out in the community and not the education world. And really that was a comment. So my question is there a fiscal note here?
So Vice Chair Belknap, I believe this bill was just numbered yesterday. So it looks like there's not a fiscal note yet.
Okay.
So I can bring us back next week if you'd like, and once we have the fiscal note impact.
I think that might be a good idea for this one, because it's hard to make a decision on something you don't know the pieces of it yet. So thank you, Angie.
No problem. Should we move on, Vice Chair Belknap? Are there any other questions?
No, I didn't see any. Thank you.
All right. Jeff, I'll turn it back to you for the next 3.
Okay, and Angie, I believe the next one's 124, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So this one is House Bill 124 from Representative Dan Johnson, Civics Engagement Pilot Program Amendments. For returning board members or anyone who was tracking the board during the legislative session last year, this was a pilot program that was part of the legislative request for the board. It was a program that the board did, or a bill that the board did vote to support. You're going to see here on line 88 the only change. This bill last year came with, I believe, either $125,000 or $250,000 to run the pilot. And that was the victim of the COVID cuts during the special session when they were preparing for the impacts of COVID on the economy. And so this program was defunded, but the law remained. Representative Johnson, the request for appropriations submitted for refunding this bill at the level it was funded at last year and moving the pilot start date 1 school year because it could not start this school year. So that's the only change this bill does. It just moves the start date of the pilot program. And I'll toss it back to you, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Jeff. Go ahead.
Okay. And the next one, I believe, just got to look at my cheat sheet here. Senate Bill 107. So this is a bill that I'm sure most of you have heard about. This is the bill that requires by February 8th that an LEA must be providing an in-person option for their students to attend. If they do not provide an in-person option and they have students who leave the LEA to go to an LEA that does provide in-person, the LEA who lost a student must give half a WPU to the LEA who gained the student. If the student also goes to a private school who's offering in person, because the LEA was only offering online, you'll see here on lines 85 down to 87, there's a formula of how much the LEA would have to contract with the private school to provide the funding for that student to the private school. The bill itself is actually not too long, considering all the conversation that's gone on around it. Is actually a fairly short bill, so it's a quick read. Did also want to highlight there is a coordinating clause for those who are unfamiliar with what a coordinating clause is. If you have two bills or more running that are changing the same piece of code, this is basically the way that you reconcile, well, what if all these bills pass and they're all changing parts of the same code? Who gets the right of way and becomes the law, and which ones go away? So there's always a coordinating clause if there's some competing bills changing the same piece of code. This does have a coordinating clause with Senate Bill 1, which passed the House today. They'll kind of just words a couple of things that are in Senate Bill 1. In Senate Bill 1, you have a new program that was being created. You may be familiar, the Hold Harmless program that we're basically doing for LEAs due to the enrollment impacts of going up and down due to COVID. That was put in Senate Bill 1, and this is just stating that schools who don't offer the online option, it puts that language about that particular piece in here as well. Doesn't really do too much. It's just coordinating with that. I just wanted to highlight that because that might be a new thing for some of you to see. But with that, there's really not a whole lot about the bill in terms of what it does. It's pretty straightforward in what it's doing. So I'll pass it back to you, Vice Chair, if there's any questions. And I know Scott Jones is on here, and I'm not going to pretend like I know more than he does about how this works. So I'll defer the technical questions to Deputy Scott Jones.
Oh, how would we with the money? Board Member Earl?
Yeah, just a quick question. Do we know why it's circled on the Senate floor? No idea.
Any reason why it is circled? And again, for those who are unfamiliar with that term, circled means paused. So it was up on the House floor, I believe, or the Senate floor. They've decided to pause it and move on to the next bill. Typically, that means there's negotiations going on behind the scenes regarding the bill, and there could be some amendments they're trying to work out. But I have not heard any particulars about this one specifically.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Earl. Board Member Klein?
Yes, just a question about that, how that would actually play out if money went with the student to a private school. Would that private school then be required to meet all of the federal mandates that come with that?
I'll take a stab at defer to Deputy Jones, but my understanding is no, the money would follow the student to the private school, but then the private school's arena would take over for the student.
I agree, Jeff, with what you stated.
Okay, Board Member Klein, did you have another question? Your hand's up.
Oh, no, that's it.
Okay, thank you. Jeff, I have one more question on this. I'm not sure you can answer it either. So if this is only for if they're doing online, there wouldn't be ramifications or changes if the student chooses not to do their traditional school, boundary school, because they offer online and in person.
So if I'm understanding correctly, and you tell me if I misunderstood, if they're going to an online only school, this would not impact them whatsoever. It does not apply to those schools.
No, I read that. But if their school is, for example, during this pandemic, some weeks they're online, some weeks they're off, would that include that if all of a sudden the student says, well, we're online, I'm going to go to a private school for now and then come back? How, this looks messy.
So the reason why that would not work is you're talking school specific rather than LEA. So if the entire LEA shut down and went online only, then technically yes, because there would be no option within the LEA. But for example, in Jordan School District, if Bingham shuts down but Harriman is open, you do have an LEA that's still offering online options. So students could file for some kind of variance, for example, to go to Harriman if they wanted to. The LEA would obviously have to work that out, but the way that this is worded, the whole entire LEA would have to be online only.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Davis?
maybe I missed this and should read it more carefully, but is there a provision in this that talks about if there's a breakout, some kind of health breakout in an area of an LEA, and the health department, who has legal authority to shut down, the schools, if they shut everything down, requiring the LEA to do online, then would this still go into play, even though the LEA doesn't have a choice in the matter? Did I miss
on that particular issue? That's actually an excellent question. So again, in your hypothetical, the entire LEA would need to be shut down before this would become an issue. So I'm not exactly sure if we've ever seen that so far in the pandemic, that an entire LEA was shut down by a local health authority.
Well, in the spring.
Schools. The spring, yes. They shut the statewide down. I would.
So could private schools still run in this, with an example like the spring?
That's actually a great question and something the bill's silent on. So it is possible what you're saying currently, the way that the bill is written, that if we went into a statewide shutdown and private schools were still open, this could be used for students to leave their LEA and go to a private school with funding being attached. Would be my understanding. Can correct me if they
Thank you.
read it differently, but.
Thank you, Vice Chair Davis. Board Member Lear?
Thank you. I think if we support autonomy and self-governance for any LEA, we support it for all LEAs. And the state board was directed by the legislature to give guidance to LEAs. The state board did that. The LEAs thoughtfully, all of them, some of them more consistent with our own opinions than others, set up a system. And I think now is the time to support those LEAs. And I absolutely, I object to this bill. I think it is punitive. I think it does create a lot of bureaucratic work and questions. But more importantly, I think I stand for the autonomy of LEAs. And even when I live in the middle of one where I'm not so sure I support the actions. So I have a hard time with this bill.
Thank you, Board Member Lear. Board Member Hymas? Yeah,
just out of curiosity, I know they mentioned the LEA closing down and the hypothetical. It has been done in the past where schools have had to close down for a couple of weeks. This temporary closure would not fall under this, and perhaps you answered it already, but am I correct in saying, let's say that a private or charter school who doesn't have another option did close down, and then for a couple of weeks, would they, and students left, would that money go with that student, or would they say, no, that doesn't really apply here since it's not an ongoing closure?
Correct in that it would, if it wasn't the full LEA, but a school within the LEA. And actually, now that you may notice my eye contact shifting away from the camera because I keep reading the language, and actually Board Member Davis and Board Member Hymas, this might answer a question as I'm reading through this and thinking out loud. Actually, I don't think that hypothetical that Board Member Davis brought up is possible. As you'll notice on line 75, they had to offer online by February 8th of 2021. So if we went into a statewide shutdown after February 8th, 2021, as long as you had in-person available before that day, you would technically be in compliance with this law. So I don't know that that would actually be possible. And again, Board Member Hymas, you would have to have the whole LEA go online only before you'd start looking at this being triggered. So school within the LEA would not trigger this.
Thank you.
Jeff, just one quick comment. That also would include a single charter. So
that is true. That is true.
So we just need to remember that. Oh, okay. Board Member Lear took her hand down. All right, we can go on. I was going to ask a question. Are there any bills coming that you have on this list that we have requested that we haven't talked about? Angie, are there any?
No, Vice Chair Belknap, the only bills, Jeff, could you scroll to the top?
What about 91, HB 91?
No, we didn't request that. That is the bill that we're requesting or working on related to accountability has not been numbered yet.
Thank you.
USBE is working on that one. But the bills that we did request are HB 181 and HB 222 so far. I will say with HB 18, the first substitute did include something that we requested, which was making the change to the term school district in the education portions of the driver education code to allow the USDB to also provide a driver education program. So although we did not ask for the majority of HB 18, Representative Ballard did make that change in the first substitute for us based on one of our requests. So right now, the two that were squarely staff or board requested are HB 181, which by the way will be heard this afternoon in the Senate Education Committee, and HB 222, which I believe is set to be heard in a committee tomorrow.
Okay, so go ahead, Angie, just stay on your list. We still have about 10 more minutes.
Great. Jeff, before you go on to education immunization modifications, I believe that's the next bill you're going to review. I had the opportunity, if you would like, Vice Chair Belknap, I actually received the fiscal impact for HB 258. So if you don't mind, I would love to share what our staff provided to the legislative fiscal analyst. Is that all right with you?
That would be great. Thank you.
Yes. So to implement HB 258, we have submitted that it would cost us a quarter of an FTE ongoing to support the program. That's approximately $37,000. And then for curriculum development one time would be $30,000. That's USBE's impact. And then for each of the participating LEAs who would participate in the program, there would be an approximate $12,250 one-time cost for them to buy different materials, including training handguns, rifles, ear and eye protection, etc. And then an almost $9,000 ongoing costs to support student background checks, the training, the course materials. So 30,000 one-time USBE, 37,000 ongoing USBE, and then 12,250 one-time for each of the LEAs and 9,000 ongoing for each of the LEAs.
Okay, now I have one more question on this. Is there anywhere in here that this is going to be made a requirement, a required course?
Right now, it's written only to be a 3-year pilot, and only up to 3 LEAs can participate. So there's nothing in the bill that states it is a requirement, but as you know, usually the purpose of a pilot program is to see how it works, how well it's received, and to potentially make it something that either could be offered long-term or could be required long-term. Right. So,
okay, thank you. All right, go ahead, Jeff.
Having trouble with mute. And as I'm pulling up House Bill 233, I did want to provide clarification on Senate Bill 107 when we were discussing if a student goes to a private school and the funding flows to the student or follows the student to the private school via the formula that's in the bill, that would only be state funding. No federal funding can go to a private school. So I want to just make sure that that was clear for everyone and I didn't mislead anyone that federal funds would never be able to go to the private school. It would only be the state funding that would follow the student. So House Bill 233 is the Education Immunization Modifications by Representative Strong. I'm going to skip over the part of the bill that applies to higher ed and just go to the part of the bill that applies to LEAs, but just know he puts in more requirements actually for higher ed. I think this is immunizations and vaccinations is a different world in higher ed than it is with K-12. But I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom of this bill, which is the only part that really changes for LEAs. And I'll highlight for you here in 93, this is the current existing part of the code regarding the grounds for exemptions from a required vaccination. He is not changing any part of this code. So the current lay of the land and status quo on how a student receives exemptions for vaccinations still applies, and how they would go about that is still the same. All he's adding in the bill regarding LEAs with vaccinations is that an LEA cannot offer both remote and in-person learning options and then deny a student the in-person option because they have not received the vaccination. So if a non-vaccinated student wants in-person option when online and in-person are both offered, the LEA cannot delineate which one the student must do because of the vaccination status. So that's all this bill really does. I can pass it back to you, Vice Chair, if there's any questions.
I actually do have one question on this. This is all about the vaccinations, not just the exempt, correct?
Correct.
I'm just wondering, and we can pull this offline, but there has been some real problems in LEAs when students come and they have all their vaccinations and you put them into the system. If a physician has given the shots 2 or 3 days early from what the sequence is, it spits them out and tells them they have to go get another shot. I think that is something we should look at. These families have gone and done what they're supposed to. Anyway, offline. So I just want you to be aware of that. Also, I think maybe for the last 10 minutes, maybe we could let board members, maybe if they have certain bills they would like to bring up that we haven't, then let's try that. Okay, so thank you. Board member Lear and then board member Earl.
Thanks, Chair. I had a question maybe for Angie or Jeff. Was interested in reading SB 131, Public Education Building Standards and Process, and wondered where the concern stemmed from. If you have any backstory on that.
And Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones might have some additional information as well. I do believe that I'm trying to remember who is working with Senator Harper on this, but I believe what he's looking at is trying to reduce costs for buildings in our LEAs and to provide a little bit more streamlining of using certain models of or plans, I guess you could say, that you would reuse so that you could save architectural costs or et cetera. But maybe Deputy Superintendent Jones remembers, but I don't know the whole backstory. But I believe it's about trying to find efficiencies or lower costs for buildings. That's my understanding.
Yeah, Madam Chair. Yeah, so Angie's spot on. What I can do is I can send, so Matt Barrett is our school construction specialist. He gave a lot of input at the request of Senator Harper, and I can share that with Board Member Lear electronically, if that's okay.
I think that would be helpful.
Thank you. And I have just a follow-up to that, Laura, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
I'm just, it looks like a lot of work for the USBE. I think the cause is just. I think it probably has some good reasoning behind it, but actually following up and monitoring LEA costs and procedures and choices is something that feels very burdensome to me as a board member. So I don't know. I can't point to exact language right now, but I just hope that, interestingly, Representative Pulsifer is sponsoring this in the House and yet is in another bill trying to streamline reporting and data collection for LEAs and USBE. So I hope this is not one of those things that would, where the cure would be worse than the disease.
Thank you, Board Member Lear. Board Member Earl?
Yes, I would like to know, so Senate Bill 91, the school accountability amendments by Fillmore, is that pretty much Polson's bill from the years before? Are there significant differences? I don't know that you've compared those, but it looks very similar, I guess is what I'm in reading through it.
Yes, when I reviewed it, it looked to be identical to Representative Polson's bill that she's run in the past.
Okay, I just wanted to see if there was anything there that stood out that was different from what we'd previously seen.
Scott, did you have a comment?
Well, I was just going to follow up, Madam Chair. I was just going to follow up with Board Member Lear on her concerns about, tracking the cost models and stuff, but I think we moved on to another bill, or should I answer that, or?
I think that would be okay to answer that.
Okay, so yes, I mean, we're deeply concerned about, how much effort it would take to track the cost models as part of this bill. There's, LEAs across the state would need, the same facility. It's different. I mean, they all have different approaches to their teaching, their pedagogy, and that would obviously impact the facility needs. So it'd be difficult for us to, recommend square footing per student or teacher, administrative space. I mean, really, this all should, be at the local level, right? I mean, that is the challenge, though, is our ability to, really track or come up with a cost model that, it just can't be a one size fits all. I hope that helps answer Board Member Lear's question.
I think it probably helps. She'll still probably want that data, if that would
Okay.
be okay.
Sure.
Thank you, Scott. All right, it looks like we're getting close to the hour. So I think we'll stop unless somebody, Scott, your hands up, unless somebody has anything that's just pressing on their heart for a bill. I don't see anyone. So what we're going to do now is we are going to take a 2.5-minute talk. No, I'm just kidding. We're going to take a 5-minute break, especially this is for our friend Lorraine and me. And then we will come back and we will start at 103. I mean, 203. Here you go, 203. Okay. Okay, if we are on target, it is 2:03. I'm going to do a quick roll call to make sure that we still have a quorum and we're still there. Scott Jones, your hand is still up, just for clarity. Board Member Booth? Board Member Booth? Board Member Cannon?
I'm back.
Thank you. Board Member Klein?
I'm here.
Vice Chair Davis? Board Member Earl?
Yes.
Board Member Hart?
Yes.
Thank you. Board Member Hymus?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Board Member Lear?
Here.
Thank you. Board Member Moss?
Here, sorry.
Thank you. Board Member Norton?
Yes.
Thank you. Board Member Straight?
Here.
Thank you. Board Member Booth?
Here.
Thank you. Vice Chair Davis? Well, we've lost her. So hopefully she'll come back on in a few minutes, but we do have a quorum, so we can go ahead and continue. We
Vice
are
Chair?
now, yes.
Scott Hansen. I joined you a little while ago.
Oh, Scott, we are so happy to have you here with us today. Thank you. We excused you.
Pleasure to join.
Thank you. I'm sorry I've crossed you out for the day. Sorry. So thank you so much. Okay, so we'll go on to, we are on 3.1 budget priorities. First, we're going to start with an information piece about the LEA stipend payments. Superintendent Scott Jones.
Thanks, Madam Chair. This is just a real quick update. As you can see in the background, the legislature had identified an initial amount of $121 million to go for stipends to eligible personnel within our LEAs. And it's based on this current year's FTE count. Now, in August, we require a request from all of our LEAs their prior year FTE count. So that necessitated, or this process necessitated us having to go out with another survey to ensure that we were getting accurate counts for this current school year. So, if you've received questions or concerns from the field about, here's another survey, it was a necessary part of the process to ensure that we were counting personnel towards this amount of funding and ensure that the funding was enough. Since then, we've received the input, or, we had a 100% compliance rate, if you will, of submissions. We, based on the counts of all of our LEAs, the 121 million is sufficient enough. So then the days ahead, I'll send out electronically to all the board members what the distribution looks like by LEA of this first iteration, if you will. I'll also clarify what positions were counted and what positions did not count as part of this process. Since then, too, or since your last meeting, or I wasn't able to talk to this one, this particular agenda item in our last meeting. But since then, too, we've been asked by the legislature to go ahead and do analysis on remaining positions. For example, positions that reside or work from, say, the district office, that are not necessarily in a school setting per se, but we're going to help or get the analysis done on all those remaining positions to see what the cost would be for those, and whether or not they could receive stipends either within this 121 million, or what additional funding would be required to reach or get stipends to those positions. That in itself too, we want to just notify everyone that we're looking at another survey for that, because we want to be absolutely precise on ensuring that the counts are correct. Because again, what we have, to my knowledge or my understanding, is data that relates to prior year, and the LEA counts now. I'll be working with staff to ensure that we don't duplicate surveys. I mean, if we have the data, we won't burden them. But I do anticipate we'll have to do another survey just to ensure that and two, that we're not double counting, personnel. I think the juice is worth the squeeze. Any recognition of all the great work that's being done out there by the LEAs is positive. Madam Chair, subject to any questions or concerns, that concludes my update or information brief on LEA stipends.
Thank you, Deputy Superintendent Jones. I don't see any hands, so let's go on to 3.2, 2021 legislative session funding priorities. Thank you.
Okay. Madam Chair, thank you. And I don't think I introduced myself as Deputy Superintendent of Operations Scott Jones when I first did that, so I'm doing that now.
Okay, except I'm going to hold for just a minute. I have two hands up, and maybe I missed them on the other item, on the information item. So let's go to Board Member Hymas first. Sorry.
No, you're right. I was too late. But I do want to ask, just to clarify, Deputy Superintendent Jones, you're going to send us a list of those who are eligible personnel. Is that what I heard?
Right. Yeah.
And when can we? Okay. I'm sorry. When can we expect to see that?
By the first of next week, sir.
Okay.
Maybe earlier. I have to get with the staff and make sure we break that out. 156 LEAs, right? We're trying to make sure that we're identifying all the positions. There's numerous different titles, and it's both licensed staff and classified, so it's going to take a little bit of time. So I think we'll be able to get to you first part of next week.
Well, absolutely. You got your hands full for sure. I guess in a follow-up, just real quick, is there feedback after that list is sent out? There's a feedback period for us to say, hey, maybe consider this position.
Well, feedback in this, there was ongoing or perpetual feedback. I mean, we had some LEAs that came back to us and said, yeah, with specific questions, right? What about this position? And whether they're in contact with students on a daily basis. We clarified those as we went. So, based on this list, we put that out, and obviously we'd open it up to any concerns they might have of somebody to get counted. I looked at this next iteration, what I just described with, identifying positions not necessarily, in the school or in contact with students would help differentiate between that, and then we'd arrive at accounting for everyone. So that's the plan, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Board Member Hymas, I just want a clarifying question. When you're saying getting these lists, were you talking from your school position or from a state board position?
Sorry, I'm looking at, I was thinking about a state position. I haven't seen anything on eligible personnel, like who that includes for any LEA. Yeah. So, I mean, I have an idea. Obviously, teachers are our main focus here. So I'm just out of curiosity wondering, I haven't seen a list, and maybe it's been sent out and it just got buried in an email, but just wondering, I haven't seen anything on that level, on the state level.
I just want to say one other thing, that Scott is always trying to do what he needs to when he needs to, but if we don't get it the first of next week, I wouldn't be shocked. Okay, so Scott, when it can come, as soon as it can, that's what we'd appreciate.
Thank you.
So thank you. Board Member Cannon.
Thank you. Scott, I'm just wondering if you could update us at the current status of the Salt Lake District, because I know I heard rumors at one time things were introduced to give this to everybody except Salt Lake District, and then Salt Lake District went into some negotiations, and they're partly back in person, and that there is a plan to go forward with that. Can you just maybe update us on the current status of Salt Lake District, please?
So, Madam Chair, to answer Board Member Cannon's question, on the status, their counts are included in our estimates of what the stipends would take. So unless we're told to back those numbers out, which I haven't been told that. So we're moving forward as if, based on what they reported, those individuals will, depending on what position they're in, will qualify for a stipend. So did I answer Board Member Cannon's question?
We also have a hand up by Jennifer Thronson.
Yeah, this is Jennifer Thronson, Director of Teaching and Learning, and Board Member Belknap. I'd be happy to answer this question. I'm a parent in Salt Lake District, so I'm aware of what's happening, if that would be helpful.
Board Member Cannon, did your answer, were you satisfied with the answer from?
I was satisfied with Scott's answer, but I'd love to hear from a parent in Salt Lake District, may be on the current cutting edge.
Thank you.
It does change frequently in Salt Lake District, but it's been a good experience for my daughter. They are planning on going back to school. They actually start back in next week, 1 day a week. And then the following week, they'll be going 2 days a week by alphabet letters. So depending on the letter of the alphabet of your last name, you'll either go Monday, Thursday, or Tuesday, Friday. Wednesday will continue to be an asynchronous day where they're at home doing whatever assignments their teachers have given them to do on their own. So there will be at least a couple days face-to-face for all students starting February 8th, but there will be, at least at my daughter's school, that may not be true for the district. They are going back next week, starting 1 day a week.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. And your hand is still up. All right. We'll turn back to Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones.
That concludes the stipend payment. So we move into the next. Okay. And I believe the next one is the prioritization of funding, correct? So, okay.
Yes.
So just to provide the background or the overview, as we've stated in previous meetings, this is a perpetual agenda item. It's an iterative process, that really starts at the end of every legislative session. When we get to the end of this one, in a subsequent meeting that you have, we'll do basically what we call an after action review on this process, which is, to determine your funding request for the next fiscal year by way of the upcoming or current legislative session, and what went well, what didn't, things like that. So from there, we move into this iterative process of identifying your funding request. In normal years, we would provide the funding request to the governor's office. Initially, the governor's office of management and budget said that they wouldn't be taking any new funding requests. That changed after your October meeting. So then we were still doing the iterative process. Business cases were submitted, and then we did, share what at that point, roughly your November, December meetings with the governor's office, what your priorities were at that point. As you know, and I briefed you on at your board meeting, your main board meeting in your January calendar this month, is that, the Executive Appropriations Committee met on December 16th. We updated you on what those outcomes were, and I just want to emphasize that there was no finalization of revenue at that time. There were estimates. So, we made some decisions, and rightfully so, and by way of the process, the board made some decisions on your prioritization, including, or as an example, the one-time request, the 60 million and the 200 million. So, the iterative process then, as you have weekly meetings during the legislative session, again, this is a perpetual item. So at this point, Madam Chair, I'll turn it over to our fiscal analyst, Dale Frost, to update you all on what's occurred from the time of your last board meeting, the main one in January, and up to this date. We do it by way of what we call the budget tracker. So it'll just really high level walk you through that. He'll let you know what business cases have been updated or added by way of this process. And then at this point too, if we had done it last week, we crosswalk with what the governor's proposal is, with what your proposals are, call out similarities, differences, talk to those to you, allow the time for you to raise any concerns about the differences or questions, if you will. So that's what we're at in this process. Before, Madam Chair, we do turn it over to Dell at your direction. I do want to also emphasize that yes, Public Education Appropriations Committee meetings have started. I encourage board members, if at all possible, to listen to those. The schedule or the agenda, if you will, does change regularly, but we do our level best to make sure that your requests are put forward to the Public Education Committee, and that we also emphasize your priorities, and make sure that any actions you take today or in any subsequent meetings are always put forward in the best and most meaningful ways possible to the legislature. So with that, Madam Chair, may we turn over to Dale for the summary of everything that's occurred since your last meeting. And then at the end of that, he'll turn it over back to you, ma'am, for any actions.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Dell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, board members. Can you hear me? Just want to make sure that, yes? Okay. The purpose of my update today is to quickly walk you through the business cases that have changed since we last spoke earlier this month, and then to go through a comparison document of the governor's budget recommendations compared to USBE's business cases. And I'll try to give you some perspective on what we know right now in terms of available revenues, though revenue projections have not changed since January or December. They will be updated again through the consensus revenue process next month. But with the governor's budget, we do have some additional insights into that. So the first thing, and I think, Jeff, are you driving? Can you scroll down to priority number 6? The first change, and all of these business cases that have been updated are in today's board backups. Any business case that is not attached to today's agenda is in the same form as it was in your January board meeting. And so if you have questions, I would look at those versions unless they are on this. There were 2 that were updated, and there are some changes there. So the first one is this mitigating disrupted learning 22 and 21, 22. And this is collapsing the 2 requests that were brought to you in January. First, the 60 million one time and the 200 million one time next year. And I hope that this provides more background and specificity to how the funds can be spent. Again, there are many things that we don't know about the learning loss that's occurred throughout the system, disrupted learning. However, there are some things that we do. Part of that business case was an analysis of Ogden School District's bridge program that I was asked to do to try to project if all LEAs engaged in the same types of activities over this summer, what could that cost? And that's in there, and the specifics of that analysis are also in your board backups today. I'd be happy to answer more questions about that. But that is all that I was going to cover with this mitigating disrupted learning. Are there any questions, Madam Chair, members of the board?
Keep going, Dale. Oh,
Moving.
hold on. Board Member Earl?
Yeah, let me just seek a clarification. So the estimate is based on a projection that is already taking place, the bridge program that's already taking place. So that's what you projected for all districts, that type of a thing. Am I accurate in saying that? They don't have to implement that program, right? They can use okay. But this was just used for a financial backing.
Yeah, we were trying to come up with some sort of methodology to to estimate what could it cost. We're not suggesting that every LEA follow that process. And my estimate was 88 to 170 million, but all LEAs would point out that the bridge program was just for the summer. And what we are envisioning are supports during this school year, over the summer and next school year. And so that's where the 260 million comes from. And you are correct that the bridge program was merely an example that we could point to and try, that we had good budget data for to try to estimate more broadly.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood that fully. Do we have any criteria in that area yet at all? Do you know what I'm saying? Are we just saying these are some you could use, but do we have any set criteria?
For the allowable uses of funds and some of the more specifics, Madam Chair, I don't know who's on the call, but I know that Superintendent Norman, Assistant Superintendent Nielsen, and others would be best suited to answer some of those questions.
I don't know who would be the best to answer the questions. So whoever is, let's go ahead and do that. I just want to remind you that this is already 6 and 8 on our list, and they're already prioritized, just for clarity.
Yeah.
Sorry. And it was my understanding when we prioritized those that we would get additional information about the usage of them. And that's why we went ahead and prioritized them. And that's why I voted for it, is because we would get additional information about it. And that's why I'm asking for the clarification. So
I actually appreciate that, Board Member Earl. And I'm happy to have somebody come and give us more clarity. We're trying to allow the LEAs to have autonomy here to provide service here. Who would be best to answer this questions for Board Member Earl, please?
Madam Chair, it's Scott, Deputy Superintendent Jones. So just so I'm clear, is the question that Board Member Earl's asking specific to what the uses would be of these state funds? Is that what we're asking, or that's what you're asking, right, ma'am?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a broad list of this is what you could use it for, and maybe that's appropriate. I'm not sure I feel that comfortable just saying, here's $200 million over the next little bit. So I'm just saying that's why I voted for it originally, is because I understood there would be further clarification. So
yes, ma'am. So
Board Member Earl, I so appreciate that question. Now I have a little more clarity on what you're asking. And unless I am incorrect, there would be a not necessarily a rubric, but a plan would have to be in place for the money to be received. There need to be some sort of plan. And I believe, I don't know if Angie's here or Jennifer can answer this, that it would be the board would determine what those parameters would be. It's a little more nimble.
Well, so I know that, if I may, Madam Chair, I know that I've worked closely with Deputy Superintendent Norman, and we had broken out the differences between the use of, the allowable uses of the ESSER money and what this money could be used for. So is she available right now, Deputy Norman?
Yeah, I'm on here, Chair Belknap. I apologize, I can't raise my hand or talk in the chat. So I was trying to do it like this, but but thank you. Yes, as was stated before, there was that usage document where we really delineated what the possible uses were between each one of them. And then it really depended on local context. So it'd be the local context of each LEA being able to decide what was needed based on their data. Now, every LEA is different. For example, some of our schools are really needing more mental health services. Some of our schools are needing to have summer school programs or after school programs. It depends on what their specific data says. So when it comes in, then we would be using it through, Scott, I'm just mentioning through the grants management system to be able to have them put it in and make those requests. So it's really local control on how it would be used according to their specific context, but then they would need to be accountable for those funds in saying how they were spent. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think that provides a little bit more framework. Someone's going to make a decision if the usage is accurate, or we're just I guess that's what I'm saying is, do you know what I mean? They're going to submit and then we say, okay, show us your data when you're done, kind of a thing. Or do we approve those or do we not approve those? I guess that's what I'm asking is what does that look like? And it sounds like there's a rubric that you have to meet criteria.
It would go through what is similar to how the ESSER funds were distributed.
Okay.
And so when it comes in, then as it's distributed, they would ask for those funding. And as long as it met the criteria of some of the things that in regards to disrupted learning, then we would have to say, that they know their data and rely on them for being honest as we do, and then be able to provide that assurance that that is what they use that money for. And then we would be able to see the outcome of that data and looking at the data after those programs were implemented.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Dell, we're back to you.
Oh, no, wait.
Oh, wait, hold on. I can't see the hands. They've got moved. Board Member Lear, sorry.
Oh, that's all right. You're always telling me to put it down, so I'm always paranoid.
Well, put it up.
For further clarification, paranoia is not always unwarranted. For further clarification, as Patty just explained this, it sounds like their plan for this is very similar to the LEA's initial plans for providing services and including all the COVID-related protections. Would that be an accurate assumption, Patty?
It could be, but most likely it's different now that school has started. Superintendent Dixon has advisory groups, and on those advisory groups, they've really been speaking to what their needs are now that their students are back in. So it's not so much the need for masks, it's really the need for disrupted learning, reaching those students that haven't been engaged, being able to provide those family and community support so that they can help engage students in different ways. And then what do they do for those students that are falling further behind? Is it something that's extended day contract? Is it some summer bridge programs, as that example was put in there from Ogden School District? Is it an extended contract for teachers so that they can have smaller class sizes in certain areas where their own local data shows that they have those gaps in disrupted learning for students to be able to be remediated or have interventions with smaller groups?
And further clarification, Chair. Is that okay, Laura?
Yeah, I'm nodding. You probably can't see me.
Oh, no, I couldn't. And I'm not asking, Patty, as if they are the same, the LEAs would be putting forth the same things, but rather that the construct would be the same, that LEAs would propose what they want to do based on their circumstances. The board would provide some general guidance and then maybe a few specifics, and then there'd be follow-up after. So I was saying, is the construct the same?
Correct. Yeah, that was stated
Right.
exactly right. So that's how it would roll out. Yes.
Thanks so much.
Okay, now Dell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I wanted to provide a little more time for that business case because it's such a large ask. The other business cases, there are 4 additional new ones that are on your budget tracker. They're in the backups. And 2 of them are business cases that you saw last year that were funded, that funding was retracted during the COVID budget changes. So the first is the school readiness grants business case, and this is to provide additional seats for at-risk students and for preschool in high-quality preschool programs. Thank you. And the next one is for Qualtrics, 1.35 million, and that would provide access to all parents, teachers, and students and administrators to the Qualtrics CX platforms to help provide data-driven decision-making and stakeholder engagement. Both of those were discussed and funded last year, at least in part. There are 2 new USDB business cases. One that is, the first one's for additional personnel needed to address the requirements under IDEA for all of their students. Most of these positions were in a business case last year. There are a few additional in this year's business case. And the final new business case is for a property acquisition for the Salt Lake campus as they begin as they continue to grow at that location, acquiring some additional property. So those are the new business cases. Also in your backup, there were two that were updated, the computer science business case and the intensive services pilot program. These were more technical and clarifying updates. They didn't actually change the requested amount or the intended programmatic changes of the business case. So that concludes my updates to business cases. If there are no questions, can we move to the comparison document between USBE requests and the governor? So in addition to—
Well, I don't see any questions, so let's go ahead.
Great, thank you. There is more information. There's a PowerPoint presentation that governor's staff provided to the Public Education Appropriations Subcommittee. So you can get a little more information on some of the requests or recommendations from the governor. So this request tries, I tried my best to compare apples to apples where possible, and then sometimes where there are noticeable differences, I include that in the notes. So the first part of this table, this includes those items already included in the base budget and the 7 priorities as I showed you in the budget tracker, and compare those to the governor's items. The ones in gray, these are the items already included in the base. And there is an alignment between all of those items. Where the differences exist, those are primarily technical in nature and not substantive. For example, the supplemental educator COVID stipend, Scott or Deputy Superintendent Jones had mentioned earlier, there's 121 million set aside. That provided a larger buffer than the governor's recommendations, but the populations are the same. And so there's no meaningful difference between that besides just the available buffer. And so those are the base recommendations. Now going down to the prioritized additional business cases, there's alignment between USBE and the governor for the business cases of OEK and intensive services. The expanded access to broadband, there's not money in the governor's budget specifically for broadband for education, but there is 50 million one time to expand rural broadband. And the governor's staff wanted me to emphasize that a portion of those funds could and likely would be used for education, especially in the rural areas. And so that, but that was a different enough request that I did not include that on the list. And going down to the supports for students at risk, this $10 million and this $26 million, they apply to the same population, but they are fairly different in nature. Our request, the $10 million, is a one-time addition to the funding that goes through years to support those students. The $26.3 million aligns with, if you remember last week when there was a discussion about Senator Milner's bill to create a WPU add-on for students at risk, and then expanding that over time. And that would replace the EARS program. That $26.3 million is intended for that purpose. And so it's a much broader, more long-term recommendation where our recommendation is more about the acute needs this year, but both have to do with the same populations of students. The final one, we talked a little bit about the mitigating disrupted learning. The governor's budget includes $50 million to address COVID-related impacts for education. This could also be used for broadband. And I would point out that the $50 million for the governor is intended for 2021. So possibly the more apples to apples comparison would be with the 60 million part of that 260 million. Though I can't say that all the uses and intentions of that are exactly the same. And but they are addressing similar related issues. And so that can kind of give you an idea of the top level recommendations or the top priorities for USBE and what was included in the governor's budget versus not. And if I can go down and just highlight a few other things, including the governor's budget, and as it compares to our other requests. So just scrolling down just a little bit, you'll see that the governor included $7.5 million for the computer science initiative, which is roughly similar to what is in the business case right now for computer science, a little bit more. The next one is the small district base funding program. And this would be to shore up the base funds used for administration, but other needs, other programmatic needs within districts smaller than 5,000 students. The governor's budget recommends funding that, but in addition, looking towards a broader conversation around how to fund rural schools, and puts a placeholder amount of $8 million to possibly consider a WPU add-on for rural students. And that would be a broader discussion around NES and some of those other things. So let's go down to the second page, if we can.
Dale, hold on just a minute.
Yes.
Janet and Jenny, can we wait till we finish this? Either one. Jenny's nodding yes. Janet, are you okay if we wait till we finish these? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There were a couple initiatives that aren't for education, the governor's budget, that aren't directly aligned with one of the business cases. One is this upskilling initiative. And from what I understand, it really is meant towards the later grades of high school and early college and bridging that gap. But I can't really speak to that. That's 16 million one time. And then 10 million was allocated in the governor's budget recommendation for safety and security upgrades for schools. And then some for the Utah STEM Action Center. And then they also allocated some compensation changes for USBE employees, but that was actually included in the base budget more broadly for others on the legislature side. And then if you scroll down, USDB, they recommend funding all three of the business cases that you've seen previously. And those were the USDB business cases that the governor had at the time. These other two, they didn't. I just wanted to quickly go over totals. Can you scroll down to the bottom? And then I'd be happy to answer any questions you all may have. So it's always a challenge to answer, how much revenue do we have to allocate towards public education? It's even more of a challenge in this year. One of the nice parts about the governor's budget, it's the first budget recommendation that comes out that is balanced. That's an actual budget in that sense. Unfortunately, this is only a piece of the state budget. And so kind of, using the rural broadband as an example, there may be pieces and parts of the governor's budget that aren't accounted for here where trying to compare the 765 million with the 535 million, it's a little difficult at that time. But at the same time, it might sound like I'm contradicting myself. It does give me pause about how much available revenue is in the state, because the governor's budget is based on consensus revenues at the time. And we've been looking at consensus revenues at the time. If you remember what we showed you in January, the legislature, after the base budget changes, estimates only 87 million total ongoing between general fund and education fund, and then over $1 billion one time, and which is why we've been talking more about the one-time requests. I do want to point out that, and I looked at some of the totals and kind of compared those. If you just look, can you scroll back up? And this doesn't break out the one-time and ongoing, so you don't see all of this data that I'm going to point to you. But if you look at the governor's budget total and USBE's prioritized items, so that's just that first table there. USBE, our requests are already $22 million higher for ongoing funds and almost $150 million higher for one-time funds. And the main point I wanted to get across is that if we're able to secure all of these funds for public education, that will be a significant lift, and it would be a great win for public education. I think it's very defendable that those revenues are there, but again, policymakers have difficult choices on where to allocate revenues. If we were to allocate all, or if the legislature were to fund all of the business cases currently right now, of that 87 million ongoing, 86%, 74 million of that would go to public ed. And the rest, only 14%, would go to all their agencies and entities. And I don't think that's realistic. We have 18 million right now prioritized. That's 21% of available revenues. That may be more in the ballpark. On the one-time side, the 287 of USBE's priorities is about 26% of that billion. It's 1,087 million. And so that's a little more feasible. Again, it's challenging to know what's available, but I would just caution, or at least point out the fact that we don't know all the available revenues, but from what I can tell and what I see from the governor's budget, that what we've already prioritized would be a significant lift already. Not to say that we can't prioritize more, but I hope I could provide a little context that way. So that was all I intended to present regarding the comparisons document. I'd be happy to answer any additional questions.
Thank you, Dale. I appreciate your insight because we don't have exact numbers. Board Member Earl.
Yeah, I have two questions. One of those is with the governor's recommendation for the WPU add-on for rural students. Is that intended to be supportive of small charter base funding as well, or is that something separate? Or do you know?
It's Chair, if I may.
Yes, just go ahead, Dale.
Oh, okay, Member Earl, it's my understanding that that WPU add-on would be used for school districts, and because the NEST program does not include charter schools. But again, that's a fairly high level and somewhat fuzzy thing. So it could include charter schools at the local or within rural areas, but I have not heard of that as an intention right now.
Okay, so then based on what you just told us that about the amount of funding and that kind of a thing, with our mitigated disruptive learning, we would be prioritizing that over things that we know that work and are needed, that are already ongoing. Is that accurate in saying that from what you just stated?
So Member Earl, I would say that there are needs across the state and there are difficult trade-offs to be made. Where we focus most of the prioritized requests are in the one-time side, and the 260 million is one-time funding, where there are significantly more resources than on the ongoing side. I don't know if that really answers your question.
Well, a little bit, except for we are getting federal funding too. And that's, there's things here I think need to be prioritized because they're critical for schools that are the ongoing funding. And I can see what you're saying. I understand what you're referring to, but there is a concern there that we may, I don't know, balancing that out appropriately may need to happen.
Board Member Earl, I appreciate your comment because I thought that myself, actually. I also understand the difference. You and I both understand the difference between one-time and ongoing. And some of these programs, if you don't give them ongoing, then you give it to them and then you cut them off. And so that's the concern in the one-time money versus the ongoing. And most of the ongoing deal with personnel, and that's where that problem lies.
The personnel and just the function of a normal school day, right? I mean, those things that make schools successful, like our Beverly Taylor Sorensen, those are things that are successful in our state. Anyways, thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Earl. Board Member Straight.
So I might need to get some education here from those who know better. But
Well, then I'm not going to be answering. Someone else will.
oh, I'm sure that there's 14 others on the board that might know more on that. Anyway, getting to the point, as I look at that 260 million, aren't a lot of the funds that we're going to use for mitigation, aren't those federal funds that we're going to get that kind of sit outside of this? And perhaps a question is, why wouldn't I want to, for example, number 5, students at risk, why wouldn't I want to move that up to number 4 and match what the governor's doing and come more in alignment with that? I think that fits with our strategic plan very well, and not even think about one-time money. What am I missing?
I think I'll turn this to Dr. Dixon because I think she's had to talk about this a lot with legislators, and I think it would be most appropriate for her.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good to see you all, board members. If I look tired and it's not even Friday, it's because I have been talking with legislators a lot on the Hill. Just a bit of a time frame to start with, because I think board member Straight, your question is kind of the backdrop for my wanting to comment. This is a large amount of money, and it links to exactly what Dale was talking about earlier. Looking at all the needs that Patty laid out, taking that from advisory groups, from everybody we could gather it from to hear what their needs are. When we set this case together after looking at what we thought would be one-time money and the availability of one-time money and knowing the critical needs, we didn't have confirmation of ESSER 2 funds. We didn't know where the governor would be targeting the GEAR funds. So those were out there as outliers and possibilities. So this use case was really around needs. Now we leap forward, and to board member Earl's point, we have federal funds coming in the form of ESSER. We have GEAR funds that will be targeted at very specific use cases for K-12. Appreciation to the governor for that. And there's one-time money with a lot of competition. As I've been in conversations with legislative leadership, with appropriations chairs, with anybody that wants to engage and talk about this, ask upfront, they've all said it's a lot of money. So we've known going in with all of this stuff in the backdrop that we were not likely to see all of this come to us. But we also wanted our legislative partners to understand the breadth and the depth of the needs out there. So laying out the use case that Patty and Dale both shared, you can see that's part of it. Okay, that's the backdrop. So I would say to the board, rather than spending a lot of time worrying about this case, it's not likely that we'll see much of this funding. I appreciated Dale's good analysis of how much we would be taking out of the whole pot of money and really what we're competing with. One-time money often goes to projects and buildings as already described. So we have to probably look to other sources, but hope that we can get some one-time money. We have received appreciation for the board submitting the priorities, the 8 priorities that we have. We have shared appreciation to legislative leaders for taking a weight off of our shoulders by already tackling the WPU, enrollment growth, enrollment hold harmless, all of the things that are already in the base budget, that we don't have to go negotiate for those things. So that's unusual, and it was very helpful. So if you look at your priorities and you look at that $260 million, it's a lot. And so I would encourage you to have conversations perhaps about your other priorities, and in hopes that we can get some of that and not worry about trying to unpack the whole thing. I think it's been described as to, if we get money, how that would be rolled out. It would be similar to how we've used ESSER. It would be LEA focused. We keep saying context matters, local needs matter. They know best what their use cases are. I used Sarah's chart in a lot of conversations on the Hill this morning, talking about possible substitute for the base bill, and feel very confident that at the end of the session, we'll see some very important missing things back in there, like mental health, digital teaching and learning, and professional development, as Angie outlined earlier. So that's just my commentary on the 260, because I've spent a lot of time on it today and a couple of days earlier, as has Scott and others. So I think the latest is we can be confident that as we look at Senate Bill 1 Substitute 1, we'll see some broader and LEA specific use cases of our federal dollars. And we don't know, but I can just tell you we won't get the 260, and we know that, and we definitely have no regrets of laying that out so that everybody knows the breadth and the depth of what our schools need. I hope that makes sense and is helpful.
Board Member Straight, did that answer your question?
Yes, I still would like some thoughts on, would it be a good idea for us to align ourselves with the governor in regards to students at risk?
Dr. Dixon, do you want to respond to that?
Well, we tried to really lay a backdrop in the funding study and a lot of other areas. So if you are asking to perhaps take the one time and align that makes more sense. And if you wanted to shift some to the support for students at risk so that you're more in alignment, that's definitely a possibility for you to do that. And perhaps makes more sense than the 260 that we've got on the screen now. That's one opinion. Somebody else might have another opinion.
Madam Chair, may I add one piece, add on to Superintendent Dixon's very eloquent explanation of that? And I don't have an answer to Member Straight's question on that, but I do want to point out, and this is, I guess it's my role to be the technical budget geek here, but we could bring that 260 down to 0 and still not address the limited ongoing funds. And that's the challenge, because that $26 million in the governor's budget is ongoing, and the 10 million for supports for student at risk and the 260 are both one time. And I will point out that one of the reasons why one-time funds are limited was because of $450 million in the state budget that's due to federal stimulus was labeled for one-time funds, because we just don't know how those revenues will continue in the following years. But if the economy continues to look strong within the state, what that may do for the next budget cycle would be that there would be some of those funds would then transition to ongoing. I know that doesn't really answer the question, but it does. I want to bring in some context that one, just taking away from the 260 would not address the limited ongoing funds available.
Thank you, Dal. Board Member Lear, I lost your hand?
Because I took it down. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Board Member Lear. Okay, do we have any other questions or comments here? Scott, do you have any follow-up here?
No follow-up at this time, ma'am.
Okay, any other board members? Board Member Earl?
Yeah, so we are needing to prioritize, if I'm understanding right, the limited ongoing funding. That's what we'll be doing soon, right? If I'm understanding correctly. So we need to look at all the asks and from there narrow it down to what the priorities of the board would be. And then we'll just see what the legislature ends up acting on, correct?
Kind of, Jenny. I think we've actually already prioritized. Scott can help me if we've already prioritized the ongoing money in our first 8 asks. Is that correct, Scott, or am I off kilter?
So yes, you have. You've already prioritized, that's Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes.
Answer Board Member Earl's question, is you've already prioritized, and that's Dale's point, is Dale's, is well taken, right? That, that's what we try to demonstrate here today, is where you're at as far as what we know about what revenue's out there. And your 8 priorities pretty much are are already there, with what we know now. Finalization of revenue occurs in a couple of weeks, right? The first part of February. So now that doesn't mean you can't, prioritize other requests, but for the most part, we're right in the ballpark of, where what we know and know even better now regarding revenue.
So Board Member Earl, did that answer your question on that? That our 8 priorities are according to what we know and have
Yeah, I
made.
understand that according to the funding that's available, right? But that wouldn't limit us from prioritizing other items and saying these, we would also like these considered if there is resources available. Is that accurate in saying that?
We actually can do that. We might want to prioritize them list differently, maybe A, B, and C, or something different, that these are our 8 top priorities, or these are 10 top priorities, and these are our, these 8 top priorities have been out and have been discussed and are on PEA's and EAC's radar already. And then the business cases have all been uploaded. They've seen them and they can prioritize those.
Okay.
So,
Madam Chair, can I request that we show the budget tracker? Because that might help board members so they can see, because that breaks out between one-time and ongoing, where this
I
sheet
think
doesn't.
that would be very helpful, because this is just a comparison and we're trying to decide which are ongoing and which aren't. So thank you, Dell. Jenny, your hand's up.
Yeah, Madam Chair, if I may, Jeff, could you go back in and get the budget tracker, please? It's the first document, I think, in the backups. Yep, there you go.
And Madam Chair, if I may just point out a couple numbers here. So in this first little, let's keep it right there, that'd be great. This first table here, the items included in the base budget, when I mentioned the $87 million ongoing available, that already takes into that account. So we essentially take that to the bank. Where this next line, these are the prioritized items so far. And you can see only 18 million of the 305 are ongoing. And that is for, I think, 3 of the business cases that have been prioritized. Early grades professional learning for 5 million, OEK for 8.7 million, and the LEA financial systems, which was House Bill 67 from last year, for 4 million. All of that together is the 18 million. And so you can think of 18 million and 87 million. Now, how much more can we prioritize there? I don't know that answer. We probably could. And I think it's certainly helpful for legislators if they know what our priorities are beyond that, if there are available revenues. It's more about, there's just I want to manage people's expectations about, especially on the ongoing revenue side, that things are limited. That was the intention of my comment.
But Madam Chair, and I think it's worth repeating, that 87 million of ongoing is between both the general fund and the education fund. So it's not 87 million just in the education fund, that's statewide.
That's helpful to know that, Scott. Thank you. That is very telling.
It's very limited, absolutely.
Jenny, do you have another question?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I guess I'm kind of sifting through all this, because to me, I think this would have been important information instead of just saying prioritize, like these are our top things, but this is the limited funds when we did prioritize, because some of these programs actually are an expansion where other items down here are a continuation of successful things that we have going on in the state, or items that were defunded or didn't receive adequate funding. And so I do have a concern that I guess I have a concern over how we prioritize now. Now that I'm looking at this a little different, we're expanding some things, like even our number one priority over maybe things that we know are very successful for schools and are working. If we've got limited funds, then, you know, I don't know. I think I would have prioritized a little different now. I guess I'm just expressing that I'm maybe having a little remorse, but that's okay. I don't know how. I would like to continue to prioritize some of the items. I don't know whether we need a motion for that or whether we have time set aside for that so that they know what our other priorities are in addition to these. I know we've already submitted these, but
You as board members, you can prioritize what you would like.
okay. What time do you mind, Laura, kind of telling me time-wise what we're looking at left today so that I have an idea?
Yes, thank you, Board Member Earl, for asking. We have from now until a hard start, I know, on our legislative priorities at 3:30.
We have about 27 minutes if we choose. Do we have anything else in there?
Let me just double check with Mr. Jones.
Yeah, well, so, Madam Chair, if I may, I think it's important for me to remind everyone that the business cases have all the info you're seeking. The business cases have been available to board members. Yes, there's been some amendments to them, but we've had those business cases in front of the board for going on the 4th month now. So, you know, Mike, and even last month, we were very clear about the $87 million, or last meeting, you know, in January. So, yeah, you know, again, you know, board members can make changes to this. You know, I would also, you know, call out that there's surely some risks, though, that if we really swap a lot of priorities out and do a lot of different things here, it could translate, you know, I mean, obviously unintentionally, that we really didn't know what our priorities were from the beginning. And you know, it's an iterative process in this part. I get that. But not, you know, we were just making sure too that, you know, there's a lot of new board members on, you know, obviously on here, and they've only really had one meeting to look at this, but we've been consistent in where the revenue amounts are, you know, the timing of your prioritizations. I mean, again, PEA's already started, and we've already put your prioritizations in front of the board, or I'm sorry, in front of the legislature by way of that PEA process. So I'm not trying to argue against reprioritizing, or I just want to make sure that we make an informed decision and, you know, accept some of the risks that might be out there as far as perception, or, you know, the fact that, you know, this information and details have been out and in the backups for months now. So, yeah, there's been some amendments. That's fair. That's fair to say. So
There have been those 3 amendments today. I would say just one thing that the legislature has been very clear on. They were not pleased, and I'm not trying to please the legislature, but they're pleased that we had been very concise in what we needed. Also, just for clarity, in our business cases, the backups do have, whether it's reauthorization, whether it's new money, whether it's an expansion of a program. So we could look in there as well. So anyway, that I would just say that. So Board Member Booth.
So my question is, what are the top 8? I'm seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in that comparison list we were just on a minute ago. That's 7 of the 8, I'm assuming. The last one, 7 of that group was the financial system update, which I would have, had I been on the board when those priorities, I would have put it up closer to the top, seeing what Scott's having to contend with and what all of the LEs are having to contend with in terms of reporting. But what is 8? Is it just the whole WPU thing that we're talking about?
No,
Madam Chair, yeah, Jeff.
Yeah, it's okay. If you're okay, I'll answer that, Scott.
Okay, sorry.
6 and 8 are the if you can actually probably see it on the board now. It's, I'll pull it up, Jeff. It's 6 and 8 are together. They're mitigating disrupted learning in 2021 and 22. They're actually mixed together, 6 and 8. 6 was our $60 million ask for the 2021, and the 200,000 was our 8 for the 2022. I know it's odd that we split them, but that's how we voted as a board to do it. So,
Great. And I can see that now in the notes. I should have read the notes. I was just staring at the table.
I'm with you. Thank you, Board Member Booth. Board Member Moss.
Thank you, Chair. I guess rather than discussion, I appreciate the comments that some of us are new and might have addressed things. With that in mind, I don't know if this is an appropriate motion, Chair, but maybe I can use the excuse that it's my first and we're in the middle of COVID, so correct me. But I would like to move that we indicate a priority, not above or into the existing 8, but that we indicate priority for small district-based funding, which is in our business case, in the amount of $3.6 million to restore the administrative funding that was lost. And I'd like to speak to that motion if there's a second.
I'll second. Sorry, Laura, you're muted.
Sorry, who gave the second?
I did, Matt Hymas.
Thank you, Board Member Hymas. Okay, and so Jim, go ahead, but can I ask a question before you start? Is this one-time funding or ongoing, please?
Well, I think that's up for discussion. Why don't I include it formally as ongoing, knowing that everything is sort of up for discussion?
Thank you, Board Member Moss, go ahead.
Thank you, and I appreciate the fact that some of us are coming to this midstream, and as a new member representing a district that has a lot of rural area, I think that I'm hearing a representative worry that the administrative funding that was pulled in the amount of $5 million, it was restored with NEST funding in the amount of $1.78 million, set back a lot of districts, even with the legislature's effort to put back a 1.8% WPU increase. 21 districts came out behind, and of the 11 who received funding from the adjusted NEST program, only 3 of those came out ahead, and they were in small amounts. This is in the business case. But those who lost money, some of it was significant, 3.5%, 3.25%, 2.5%. And I think it's important that some of this core functioning of an LEA is protected. And so the reason I moved reluctantly, knowing the constraints that are out there, is simply that they have been scrambling for a year in these small rural districts to wear 5 or 6 hats. And there is a concern that if this admin funding is not restored to the level it was before, that it goes by the wayside. So the business case outlines the loss that's been incurred. Some of that, for example, like Garfield picked up, their unrestricted funds decreased 0.2%, but the enrollment increased by 3%. And so the unrestricted fund was actually on a net decrease of 3.26%, even after the WPU. That's at the top of the list, but it goes down from there. And so, again, with reluctance, I want to put this out because I think they're doing the core work of responding to COVID in 5 or 6 different ways, and that it would be appropriate to restore the funding, or at least prioritize, express our support for prioritizing that admin cost funding. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do we have any, I would like to repeat the motion. I maybe changed it just slightly, Jim, just for clarity's sake. So tell me if this is the motion and you agree with it. Indicate as a top priority, as a priority business case for small districts based funding at 3.7K ongoing. So, and I'm not sure how we'd indicate that. We'd have to figure that out.
And I think it would be priority number 9 outside of the existing 8, correct?
Oh, so you want to add it to the priority list?
I do, but not to
Okay.
replace anything on it.
Okay,
Sorry.
all right, thank you. That gave me full clarity. Thank you. Okay. Anyone else want to speak to that motion? I have several hands up, but I'm not sure that they want to speak to that motion. Board Member Earl, are you speaking to this motion? I can't hear you, Board Member Earl.
My apologies. That was exactly what the discussion, I don't know if it was misunderstood in some way, but that we didn't reprioritize what's already there, but we add to those things as a recommendation. If there is funding, this is the direction we would want you to take it. So if there was any misunderstanding, I hope to clarify that I realize that the board has already taken votes. Although all those were not unanimous, I would say that, it is the board's direction at this time. So I'm not seeking to change that. But I would add to, I would agree with this funding change here.
Thank you. Board Member Lear.
Thanks. I have a question, and I'm not sure if it's of Scott or Dale or the maker of the motion, but I do support, I wholeheartedly support funding for small districts. I think they are the heart of their communities. So it doesn't just hurt the school, it hurts the community. And that's sort of an old-fashioned notion, but is very much the same. Is also very true. I've seen it in North Sanpete and Garfield. So I support that. I'm trying to see on this budget tracker chart where that money would come from. And if that's a dense question, I apologize. But I would like to agree with the motion, but I'd like to see where the money is coming from.
Thank you, Board Member. Scott, could you answer her question, please?
Yes, Madam Chair. Well, so when Board Member Miller says coming from, just from the if they were to fund it, it would come from the education fund. And it's also from, we're asking for it to be ongoing. So do you mean, I think I need a little bit more context to your question.
I'm asking,
like
Scott,
WPU
sorry.
adjustments? Or?
No, yeah, well, sort of. I'm asking where there's a finite amount, I thought. If we're saying, if there's more money, this is what we'd like to add, that's one answer.
Oh.
If you're saying, no, this would come from, like you said, the WPU increase, or it would come from one of our other priorities. Although Board Member Moss said he didn't want to adjust those. So I'm just trying to figure out where the 5 million, I know it would come from the education fund, but would it come from something that's on this chart, or is it just if there is additional money, we'd like to add a ninth priority?
Yeah, okay. Madam Chair, I think I understand the question. So, Dell and I, we can't emphasize enough that, we don't have the final revenue available. Even PEA, to my understanding, hasn't been allotted. In a meeting we had with Executive Appropriations Committee leadership, the superintendent asked, the question, how much money has been allocated to public education appropriations? And they didn't know yet. They didn't have that information. So we don't know what we don't know at this point, right? We will know as well, when PEA knows how much money's been allocated to public education appropriations. So we do the level best we can to let you know what's out there, which Dell has done, which, 87 million of ongoing spread out from amongst the whole state, 1 billion or more of one-time money, again, subject to all areas of the state, right? And then, from there, we do the best we can to say, you can ask us. So to answer your question, when the board prioritizes and communicates to the legislature that of all the requests we have, here are our top 9 or our top 8 or our top 10, then they've been very good very great partners at honoring the board's priorities, right? Within whatever they're allotted. With year after year, they've just really done their level best to, it's not always been dollar for dollar matched exactly what you've requested. But what I would say is that when they know what we're all anxious to know and how much revenue is available, that they're very good about saying, yes, okay, we want to honor what the board's priorities are. So if all our priorities, whether they be one-time or ongoing, fit into what PEA is allocated, Public Education Appropriations Committee is allocated, I think they'll honor that. But also keep in mind, they also have to deal with higher ed's requests. And now, of course, agencies that serve disabled population, right, or disabled children. So, all of these things are part of this process, and we don't necessarily know exactly what all of higher ed's requests are, or all of the different requests that are coming at them. So, they would likely fund 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 before 9, right? But if they have enough money to fund 9, they might be able to cover that. So, I know that's a very long-winded answer to your question, but I'm hoping that provides everyone context on this.
It sounds like it's the latter. If there is enough money and it spreads out thin enough or broad enough, then they'll add number 9. So thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to put in one thing too, Carol. They may do something else and say, these are all important to the board, so we're going to cut back on all the others to make sure that we hit 9 and 10. So that's also something that may happen.
Good.
Janet? Sorry, Board Member Cannon.
Thank you. I need a clarification. So on these business cases, the pass-through business cases, we have a small charter case that wants some money, and then we have a small district. And I believe Carol was referring to the small district base funding request. And I believe Board Member Moss was referring with his motion to the small charter school-based funding.
No, actually, Janet, we're talking about the motion is to indicate the small district-based funding of 3.7K ongoing as priority number 9. That's his motion.
Small district, not
Yes.
okay, not the small charter. Okay.
No. And it's not small charters, just charters, sorry.
May I call the question, or there's still?
Wait just a minute, Jim. Okay, maybe you don't need to call the question because no one's asking any more questions. So then we don't have to go through that. All right, so the motion on the table is to indicate priority number 9 for small district business case based funding to number 9 for 3.7K ongoing. We're going to have to take a roll call vote on this, please. Let's start. Board Member Booth?
Yes.
Board Member Cannon?
Yes.
Board Member Klein?
Yes.
Board Member Davis?
Yes.
Board Member Earl?
Yes.
Board Member Hart?
Yes.
Board Member Hymas?
Yes.
Board Member Lear?
Yes.
Board Member Moss?
Yes.
Board Member Norton?
Yes.
Board Member Straight?
Yes.
Board Member Hanson? Board Member Hanson, are you still here? Board Member,
Can you hear me? Yes.
thank you, Board Member Hanson. I skipped right over you. I'm sorry again, because you're totally crossed out on my paper. Okay, Lorraine, as you can see that vote is unanimous with Chair Huntsman not here. All right, Janet, your hand is still up. Board Member Earl, did you have something?
Yes, I would actually like to move the small charter school-based funding just below what we just prioritized. So anyways, I'll speak to that in a minute. That's my motion.
Can you give me clarity on the funding and if it's ongoing or one time that you're asking for? Jenny, you're muted.
I don't know how I do that. Maybe it's just hovering over my name. I don't know. Sorry. Ongoing as well.
For how much?
It's, hold on just a second. Let me look down on my list here. So we have listed here, hold on, 7 million.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Who is that?
Matt Hymas.
Oh, thank you, Board Member Hymas. All right, Jenny, do you want to speak to your motion?
Yeah, I just feel like this, once again, this is some of the funding that was pulled back, and it's key for helping these charters be successful and do what they need to do. And I feel like before we expand on things, this should be one of those key things that we fund. So that's my motion.
Board Member Moss.
Could I speak to the motion and also offer an amendment?
Absolutely.
So I support this for the same reasons that I explained for the small districts. I think, as I've been hearing from the charter schools that I'm familiar with, they're doing the same kind of multi-hat wearing heroic administrative work while they're also trying to be in the classroom. And I think we run a risk if that money is not there of losing people to burnout and leaving the leadership of their schools, of not being able to support those who are wearing these different hats, whether it's curriculum or assessment or accounting. And so I think this is something that was initially funded in the amount of $8 million, was reinstated as the charter-based funding program at $3 million. But the vast majority, about 25 charter schools, came out roughly equal or slightly ahead. Most of our 130 charter schools came out behind. And so the request here, I think, again, relates to the core response to a pandemic and all the other issues that we're throwing at these charter LEAs to give them the ability and the support to keep this funding stream in place. Again, I think the fear that I've heard is that if it's not restored, then it risks falling off permanently as other programs move in. And this is one of those core costs of doing business. I do want to offer an amendment, though. I understand from the charter community that they're willing to adjust this to one-time funding in the amount of $5 million. And so I would offer that amendment.
So the amendment would be to make number 10 small priority for charter schools, a $5 million one-time funding, correct?
Correct, thank you.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
I think that was Board Member Hymas. Do we have any discussion to this amendment?
Chair, you are muted.
If you're not going to speak to the amendment, will you put your hands down? It would really help me.
Chair, you are muted.
Sorry, Board Member Cannon. Jeez.
Thank you. I noticed that we're given information saying that this puts small charter school based funding in the basic school program. How is that significant in terms of our asking for this as one-time money?
Scott, can you help us
even things out, or will it continue to be unequal? Could you please help me with that?
Scott, can you help us there? And just as a reminder, we just have a few more minutes on this. We have a hard start at 3:30.
Okay, Madam Chair, I need to bring Dale in on this. He has the technical background because of the work group. on this. So Dale, can
Thank you, Dell.
Yes, Madam Chair, Member Cannon. If it were one time at $5 million, the WPUs that were used to calculate the 7,058,600 could be prorated. Honestly, I'm not sure if it would be part of the basic school program or related to basic, but all of it would be part of the minimum school program. And that can be figured out. Obviously, if it's one time, it wouldn't be ongoing and it wouldn't solve the ongoing nature of these admin needs, but it would solve the problem for fiscal 22. I don't know if that answers the question.
Thank you, Dale. Vice Chair Davis.
Yeah, I'd like to speak to the amendment, in support of the amendment. You know, in addition to the COVID craziness that we're dealing with this year, I've heard from a lot of folks that some of this admin cost is needed because of reporting requirements. And we're working on USIMs and working on trying to think through our reporting requirements and trying to reduce those. So perhaps in a year, we can analyze where are we now. And, but I think more importantly, we've been asked, to my understanding, by the LFA to try to stick to one-year only requests this year. So I just think it will have a better chance of being funded. That's what I think.
Thank you, Vice Chair Davis. Board Member Hart.
I'm actually lowering my hand because Ms. Davis already said what I was going to say.
Thank you, Board Member Hart. Board Member Cannon Davis, your hands are still up. Thank you. Do we have any more discussion to this motion, which is to prioritize small charter school funding as number 10 for 5 million one-time funding?
Chair Belknap,
Yeah.
you skipped the amendment. You're on the amendment now.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I just want to skip everything. Just kidding. Okay, so the amendment is to change this to a 5 million one-time ask. That is the amendment to, we need to vote on that. So let's just go to that right now for the amendment. Board Member Booth.
Yes.
Board Member Cannon.
Yes.
Board Member Klein.
Yes.
Vice Chair Davis.
Yes.
Board Member Earl.
Yes.
Board Member Hanson. Board Member Hanson, try again. I know he's talking. If you want, you could raise your hand or do a check mark too. Board Member.
did.
Oh, yes, okay. Board Member Hart.
Yes.
Board Member Hymas.
Yes.
Board Member Lear.
Yes.
Board Member Moss.
Yes.
Board Member Norton.
Yes.
Board Member Straight.
Yes.
Okay, again, Lorraine, that's everybody except Chair Huntsman. It comes unanimous. Okay, now on to the motion at hand then would be that we prioritize small charter school-based funding for 5 million one time as priority number 10. Carol, you have a question?
I do. A comment. Are you
Okay.
ready for that?
Yep, I'll just.
I wrestle with this every year. I think it goes back more than my board member days, where I want to put everything I really want on paper so the legislature has a record of that. And then the other part of me says, no, if you put everything you want, I'd like to add Beverly Taylor Sorensen. I'd like to add intensive services. I'd like to add 2 or 3 others. Then the legislature either doesn't take it seriously, or special interest rule, or the other things that I really, really, really want are diluted. So I am torn in this activity every single year. And I think I would rather stick, though the cause is just, the idea is a good one. I like the idea of the one-time funding. I just can't jeopardize or undermine the priorities that we already had. And in fact, some of those that I hope get one-time funding in through bills like Beverly Taylor Sorensen or the intensive services pilot. So reluctantly, I can't support this because I'm becoming a realist in my old age. Thanks.
Thank you, Board Member Lear. Okay, again, the motion on the table is to prioritize small charter school based funding at a 5K one time as priority number 10. Okay, we will do a roll call vote. Board Member Booth,
Yes.
Board Member Cannon,
No.
Board Member Klein,
Yes.
Board Member Davis,
Yes.
Board Member Earl,
Yes.
Board Member Hanson,
No.
Board Member Hart,
Yes.
Board Member Hymas,
Yes.
Member Lear,
No.
Board Member Moss,
Yes.
Board Member Norton,
Yes.
Board Member Straight,
No.
Lorraine, I see that it passes 8-6, I think it is, with Board Member Cannon as a no, Board Member Hanson as a no, Board Member Lear as a no, and Board Member Straight as a no.
And Vice Chair Belknap, what was your vote?
I didn't vote. It's a yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I know that there might be some other things that you want to talk about today, and we'll do that next board meeting. But we need to move on to number 4 on our agenda to have motions on legislation. Board Member Earl.
Yes, I actually would like to make a motion that we support a motion of support for Senate Bill 91. Let me get down to it so I can read the title, or unless someone else has it pulled up.
Can you
I
give
don't
us the titles, Jeff?
Yeah, I'm looking for it on my, oh, you're talking to Jeff, sorry.
School accountability amendments.
Yes,
Did we go over that one today?
we asked about it. I asked about it to see if it was the same as Marie Polson's.
Thank you. Okay,
That's my motion.
do we have a second on that?
I'll
Second.
second that. Brent Straight.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol, also.
Oh,
All right, any
That's all right.
discussion? Any discussion to that motion? Janet and Cindy, you can leave your hands up. I know you're on the deck. Okay, I don't see any discussion to that motion. We've got to do roll call, so everyone be ready. Here we go. Randy,
Yes.
sorry, Board Member Booth.
Yes.
Okay, Board Member Cannon,
Yes.
Board Member Klein,
Yes.
Board Member Davis, Vice Chair Davis,
Yes.
Board Member Earl,
Yes,
Board Member Hanson,
He has a thumbs up.
okay, he did, okay. Board Member Hart,
Yes.
Board Member Hymas,
Yes.
Board Member Lear,
Yes.
Board Member Moss,
Yes.
Board Member Norton,
Yes.
Board Member Straight.
yes.
Okay, that's unanimous for support. Oh, I didn't reread the motion. Sorry, Lorraine. The motion was to support SB 91 school accountability amendments. Thank you. All right, Board Member Davis,
Thank you. Sorry, I was frozen for a second. I move that the board support HB 222 School Land Trust Program Amendments and HB 105, which is Students with Disabilities Amendments.
Do I have a second to that?
I'll second that. Board Member Booth.
Board Member Booth is the one I heard. I think there were others.
You beat me.
School land trust. Okay, do we have any discussion to that? Board Member Lear, are you on deck for something else?
Yes, I am on deck for something else.
Thank you. And maybe Cindy took Carol's thunder here, so.
Yeah.
No.
Cindy, would you like to speak to these for some reason, or there's no discussion?
Yes, I do, quickly. We asked for HB 222. Just a quick recap, it has website changes and it moves the reporting requirement from the SEC out of code and into board rule. So we have some more agility in the reporting deadlines and such in the future. And then HB 105, the board supported last year. It takes special education and as I understand it, it changes the growth cap for 26 districts, not the ones that I live in per se, but several others. It's kind of a random growth cap, and I quite frankly don't even know how it's legal to say you can only have 14% growth in special education. No more special education students can move into your area. So it's really a strange bit of code anyway, but at least this raises the cap a bit, so it becomes a bit more palatable. And then it also takes, so special ed funding comes on a 5-year growth rate. This takes a year, the 5th year off the end, pushes it down to the 4th and the current. So the numbers are a little more accurate and reflective of what the current situation is. And something similar to this was done for charter schools a year or two ago. And I think this is kind of catching up to that and doing this for districts as well. And I will be happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Thank you, Cindy. Does anyone have any more discussion to this motion? These are connected. The motion is to support HB 222 School Land Trust Program Amendments and support HB 105 Students with Disabilities Amendments. Any discussion to those? Okay,
Laura. Oh, Laura, I have some. I just didn't know if I should leave my hand up or take it down, but I would like to ask a question of Board Member Davis.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Board Member Lee.
I completely, absolutely support HB 105 and also the other one, but I'm wondering if that money, where that money comes from. And I keep asking where that money comes from, and people asked like I'm asking something odd, but it's not all federal. It's not federal money. It must be state money. So is this just another way of adding a different priority to the board's requests?
I will try to answer, and I will ask Deputy Superintendent Jones to correct me in any place that I am wrong. I think that if it's implemented right away, I thought someone said that there could be a fiscal impact of $2 million, and that would be for those growth rates, I'm guessing, and to reduce the funding lag from 5 years to 4 years. It's not necessarily a funding lag, but the funding calculation. So it would become more current and accurate. And so, yes, there would be some more added in there. And I'm guessing that that will come out of the state funds. We currently have a 1.53 add-on to the WPU, which is also listed in this bill, but that's not changing. This is staying the same in this bill. So there's just those formula change and an increase on the growth cap. And I just have to say the formula change, you know, you're going to have to pay for your special education students either way. And so what this does, though, is allows some more of that 1.3 add-on for those 26 districts that currently have a growth cap that's higher than this 12% random cap that's been placed on them. Maybe Leah Voorhees should answer this. She could be rolling over saying she's getting all wrong, but that's my understanding. And it would come from the same coffers that the special ed add-on currently comes from right now.
Which is the education fund.
Yes.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Leah, if there's something else, then raise your hand. If not, and Cindy got it, then we'll keep moving. She's not raising her hand, Cindy. Way to make it up and have it be right. So let's go ahead and vote on the motion is to support HB 222 School Land Trust Program Amendments and support HB 105 Students with Disability Amendments. Okay, Board Member Booth.
Yes.
Board Member Cannon.
Yes.
Board Member Klein.
Yes.
Vice Chair Davis.
Yes.
Board Member Earl.
Yes.
Board Member Hanson. See if what he does, somebody tell me.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Board Member Hart.
Yes.
Board Member Hymus.
Yes.
Board Member Lear. Board Member Lear. Oh, I saw you say yes, but you might have to say it out loud.
Yes.
Thank you. Board Member Moss.
Yes.
Board Member Norton.
Yes.
Board Member Straight.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, do we have any other items for now? Board Member Lear.
Yes, I'd like to move that the board support SB 118 State School Board Candidate Amendments by Senator Reeby.
Do we have a second to that motion?
Yes.
That's
Norton.
a second by Member Norton. Do we have any Carol, did you want to speak to that or are you okay?
Please, I'd like to speak for it just for a moment. I've said my piece largely. I just feel like if we are true believers of an elected school board, then we have to make it realistic for school board members. We're not running for big important offices where there are donors standing in line. And I think the whole public school system is benefited by more discussion, more candidates, more people who are invested in a real way. And 500 signatures means you don't have to hire someone to get those signatures. You can actually do it. I understand the differences in districts, but I think Senate candidates have donors, they have backers. School board members, for the most part, do not. And I have heard so much lately from people in my school district who wonder about the election of local and state school board members and say, how do I make a difference? And my answer to them is to run, to be part of the discussion and part of the process. And they can't realistically do that if they have to pay signature gatherers. So this is about, in my mind, this is about true democracy and true participation. And I really hope we could support it, even if it hurts us in some ways, because it will put additional candidates on the ballot. But it's so healthy, I feel like. So thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Board Member Earl.
Can I seek a clarification on this bill? I'm sorry, I'm trying to look for the number real quick. So 118.
Yes.
School board members or local school board members? It's state board, I thought.
State. It's just state. And my comment, Jenny, was to say philosophically, running for office is a huge investment. And I wasn't trying to imply it was local board members. Just state.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Can I speak to it then too? I don't know if I'm next in line.
Yes, you are. Carol, you can put your hand down too.
I'm trying.
Okay.
Okay. I once again, I guess if we're going to loosen it for one, we should loosen it for all. I kind of feel that way because I think they're all important. This is equally as important. I guess, I don't know, maybe some people are paying people to do that. That was not the intention. I think originally was to do that. It's to actually have support from community members. And that's why there's that number. And that's why there's the signature items, is to have people step behind you and support you. So that's my concern with that, is we're weakening that.
Thank you, Board Member Earl. was going to say something and I totally lost it. Board Member Hart.
My concern is I think the number needs to be less. I'm just concerned that when you drop it down to 500, and your area could include, say in my case, 15,000, you could only concentrate on one area and completely neglect other communities and still make it on the ballot, which I'm wrestling with right now, if that's a good idea or not, or if it matters. But I do think that there needs to be some effort to reach out to the whole jurisdiction and not just pieces, parts of certain communities. And it is a big effort, and it's expensive. So I know that there are issues, but I'm not sure that this doesn't substitute one issue for another issue. Just some thoughts I had. Thank you.
Vice Chair Davis.
Yeah, I agree with Board Member Earl. If I could reduce the number of signatures for everybody, I would do it. But we only have one choice in front of us, and that's for state school board members. I just think it's so cost prohibitive to run, and it's cost prohibitive to gather signatures. And just a year or two ago, any person could run for the state school board as it was a nonpartisan race. And some people say, well, that makes it too big. But I would ask us to think about the fact that we have technology now. I mean, if this were 10, 20 years ago, I probably would not even vote for this. But so many people across all of our jurisdictions can see us, they can hear us, they can vet us and see if we represent them well or if some other candidates represent them well. And I'm not opposed to the caucus system either. I've been a delegate for the last 18 years in a row until I just moved recently out of my area and hope to be again, because I believe there's some really healthy parts of that system as well. But man, it's cost prohibitive to gather signatures. So I would support a reduction.
Thank you, Board Member Davis. Board Member Cannon.
I am in support of this and in agreement. I too would like it to pertain to more offices, but we only have an opportunity to vote today on this specific HB or SB 118. I believe that we would be able to have a more greater variety of candidates, and being able to get 500 signatures is still a lot of signatures. And when people go about seeking these or seeking people to elect them, it is time consuming and it is labor intensive and it is expensive to hire people to do that for you. So I'm in support of lowering this to from 2,000 to 500.
Thank you, Board Member Cannon. Board Member Norton. Board Member Norton. Are you talking?
And I am now unmuted.
Thank you.
I am in support of Senate Bill 118 as well. And as I looked at my past ballot, I don't find that very often we have too many candidates. I think so often, we are left with very limited choices. And I think anything that we can do to increase that is so much better for our education community, our state, our cities, et cetera. I think that we need to get a better crosswalk of America involved in elections. And I think that this is one way that we could help that.
Thank you, Board Member Norton. Vice Chair Davis. Okay. Board Member Norton, do you have something else? No, just your hands up. Okay. Board Member Earl?
Yeah, just a reminder, this is to put them on the primary ballot. This isn't, to go through the caucus system and such. This is, so in essence, you could have, 10 people on the primary ballot. Someone could be winning by 7%. That's the point of narrowing it down before the primary ballot. So this really, as much as we think it's going to expand, the vetting of people often takes place before that. And it's more back to a representative form instead of a, anyways, I just think this is not a good idea. So.
Thank you, Board Member Earl. Board Member Lear, do you have something new to add?
I do. I just wanted to add one more comment that I forgot to say in my first promotion of this. I've run twice now. The first time I ran with 9 opponents. This time I ran uncontested. Granted, the stress was much less. It was 0. It was easy to put around a few yard signs, but I felt so invested in the State Board of Education discussion. There were debates. There was active questioning of all candidates involved. It was such a exhilarating feeling, and that sounds odd, but it really was, to see parents, voters pay attention to public education. And I would do anything to encourage that again and go back to that, to a greater number of participants. So I think that's another important point.
Thank you, Board Member Lear. Board Member Straight?
When I think back to just over 4 years ago, that was an open primary. And that was a lot different. And I don't think we're going back to that. And I support this concept, but I just wonder about the timing and our messaging. If I could trade going from 2,000 to 500 signatures for getting school grading, letter grades for school accountability, I want to win that fight first with school grades. And Representative Polson put that up year after year for several years. I'm thinking we have a chance this time. And so it's not a matter of being against it, because I am for it. It's just a matter of, is this the right time? I'm also reminding everyone that we have an audit coming out here soon. And I believe that issues regarding the state board, appointed versus elected, and these different, I think that's going to be part of that. And so I kind of like to hold off, but I'm in favor. It's just a matter of the timing.
Thank you, Board Member Straight. I don't often weigh in when I'm chairing, but I actually tend to agree with the fact that the more opportunities we provide people, especially those who maybe don't have a large sphere of influence or finances, it gives them an opportunity to be part of our republic and to be part of this. And so I actually am for this amendment in SB 118. Jenny, I'm going to let you speak again, but if it's not new, if you debate that in your own head.
I actually want to make a motion that we adjourn.
We still have 4 minutes of debate time, plus we have a motion on the table.
I call the question.
Lorraine, can you even adjourn when you have a motion on the table?
We haven't had this happen before, so I would have to take a minute to look that up.
What about saying I call the question, which trumps the other motions?
Motion to adjourn. I'm not sure where that's at in the hierarchy, so hang on just a second.
Thank you. I've never had this happen before. When happening. We're in the middle of a motion and have this motion made. So hold on. Don't change the channel. If you're as old as me, you're thinking about changing the channel like this rather than like this.
Chair, I'm just looking online here and it says, is a motion to adjourn in order when another has the floor, and it's no.
Is that under Robert's rules?
No, this is the first thing that comes up when you Google motion to adjourn.
I totally believe in Google.
Okay, Chair, this is Lorraine. That's a privileged motion, so to adjourn. So someone, I guess you obtained the floor, but it's really up to you to apply Robert's rules. So Chair, you know, you can do what you want. If someone questions that, that's another story, but.
I missed what you said. What does it say, Lorraine, that we what?
Well, that's a privileged motion, is the motion to adjourn.
Okay.
But since you have a motion on the floor, I think it's up to you to apply that.
Okay, I'm going to go then with Janet's explanation and take privilege as a chair to call this motion. There's no other hands up than Jenny's. Jenny, do you still have something?
No.
And we'll take a vote on support of SB 118 school board candidate amendments. Board Member Booth,
Yes.
Board Member Cannon,
Yes.
Board Member Klein,
No.
Board Member Vice Chair Davis,
Yes.
Board Member Earl,
No.
Board Member Hanson,
Yes.
Board Member Hart,
Yes.
Board Member Hymas,
No.
Board Member Lear,
Yes.
Board Member Moss,
No.
Board Member Norton,
Yes.
Board Member Straight,
Yes.
Lorraine, I see 8 yeses, and with mine, that's 9. And the noes are Board Member Klein, Board Member Earl, Board Member Hymas, Board Member Moss. Did I miss anyone? Please help me.
That's what I had as well.
Thank you. And it is now 4 o'clock on the very nose. So I want to thank you for your efforts. This has been Herculean today. Thank you to our staff and thank you to board members. I will take one last motion.
Can I make a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn by Board Member Earl. Non-debatable, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.